Welcome to SoundMindBeats podcast. We go live Tuesday, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, USA, every week. Please come and join us on TikTok. And in case you missed it, we're going to be uploading the full versions here on YouTube. Thank you for listening. See, just passing by. About to get back to work. Right on, man. Appreciate you stopping in. What's up, real one? How are you, man? Yeah, I was thinking like we'll start talking maybe some strategy. And we'll see like if the other guest sample rates. Okay, we could talk about that for sure. That's actually a huge subject, which I think would be a good one. There's my guy Brian. I know I got on early. I didn't text anyone today though.
What's up, Daddy-O?
What up, dude? Good morning. Good morning.
What's new? Sample rates, I heard.
Yep, sample rates. They're kind of
like
on this.
getting all nerdy.
Let me on the course. I don't really have the course like set up. I did and I didn't. So my bad, native. I'm still kind of getting a lot of that put together. I've been all over the place. Let's see.
Didn't do it. That's a good way to start. Yeah, that's probably not a good way to start.
Yeah. See sample rates in my workflow. That's actually a good conversation. I find it kind of interesting. So I know a lot of people have different takes on it. Anything exciting for the week?
Dude, it's like up to my ears in like edits of, I tracked like 4 projects. Probably one of those where I've always given this business advice to other people, and it's like you never say no. You always just say you're booked. And because sometimes like if the first time you say no, maybe they don't call again, even if it's like you have a legitimate reason to turn down a gig. But I did like 4 tracking projects this week, and which is great. I love when the phone rings, and that's kind of why we do what we do. But I'm like, oh man, now I gotta edit all this stuff,
Oh man, like I feel your pain, dude. Whenever I get flooded with mixes, it's stressful. It's super stressful.
Yeah,
it is.
It's good stress though. I mean, it's like we could be like, man, dude, nobody calls. Nobody wants me to do the thing that I set out to do. Like, totally. If nobody wants to employ you for your chosen vocation, then that's worse than being too busy, right?
Yeah, pressure might be a better word than stress, right?
Yeah, for sure. But that's how we all get better.
Yeah, exactly, dude. 100%. So we're kind of thinking like brainstorming some topics today, and someone brought up sample rate, which I think would be kind of good to briefly cover. I know a lot of aspiring engineers, anyways, or just people that are recording themselves, have a lot of questions about it. So we could probably talk a little bit about that, and then maybe even talk about some strategies and how to move forward this year. Just with changes and just discuss ideas if anybody has any unique ideas. What do you think? You guys got any more ideas?
As far business strategies, like mixed strategies?
Business strategies is kind of what I was thinking. Yeah, no problem, Kristen. Whenever you're available, dude. That's what I was thinking anyways. Especially, I don't know, these past 2 weeks, I've really been diving in my brain on how I want to spend my time this year in building. I've kind of been operating, I mean, roughly the same for the past 6 years with slight changes, but I think I'm going to make a drastic change. Just recognizing what's kind of going on.
No hat?
No hat would be a huge change.
Right. Yeah, it's like that should have been like yesterday for April Fools. I'm really going to mix it up, guys.
No hat. No hat.
My big change last year was just I had long hair and I just went bald. Shaved it.
I totally remember when you had long hair, bud. Like it's just crazy, like the changing, man. Because you had like long
down to fucking here, man.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I wonder what it's like to be bald. And then
Yep. Just do it. It's magical. It is.
Sick, yeah.
I always say this: the advantage. I do my hair once a week, so
right. Sure.
It's the best thing ever. It really is. Plus, I've been shaving my head since I was like 13, so I predicted my baldness, and it's not our fault. Father Time stole our hair, so whoever catches him, it's not our fault.
Yeah, it's pretty funny stuff. Quick question though.
Mhm.
Do you have a beard guy or do you do your own beard? This is what
I do.
everybody wants to know.
Yeah, I do my own.
Oh.
I've like, I swear, I bought clippers when I was like 13, and I've never been to a barber since.
Really?
Ever once. Yeah,
Think of all the money you save, dude. It's like making
seriously,
your
dude.
own coffee.
Yeah, and I'm not lying. I'm not lying. My wife recognized it, and she commissioned me to start cutting her hair, and now I cut her hair as well.
Nice.
Damn.
That's
Dude,
part of
YouTube's
the
amazing.
business strategy, right? You're going to open up like, SoundMindBeats and beauty parlor,
100%, man. Like you can get your hair cut in the mix at the same time.
Beats and Barber.
Sound mine hair.
Sound my
go. Patent pending on that trademark. Yeah.
Or sound hair beats.
sound hair beats. Come on, man.
When someone's like, "Yo, man, that beat's got a little bit of
Good
hair
day.
on it."
Hello.
Greetings.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. Just give me a second. Set up the camera. Now, safe. There I am.
Hello.
Gentlemen,
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning,
So we're kind of talking. We did have some suggestions in the chat about some topics. I think a good way to start this would probably be sample rates. A lot of people always have questions about that. I know we all have different ideas about it, so maybe we could all kind of briefly cover like what sample rate you use, and if you have a reason why, share. What do you think?
It's a common topic. Yeah, it's a good topic.
Yeah, especially for the newcomers. A lot of people are very curious about it.
I think, I guess I'll just start. I feel like it's much more important in the recording stage than in the mix stage, generally speaking, because the higher the sample rate, the more resolution you're gonna get, right? The more frequencies essentially is what you're gonna capture. So I think with modern music, like pop music, hip hop, rock music, anything that's more modern that's going to eventually be streamed anyway. I think 48's a pretty safe sample rate. Obviously 88, 1 and 96 are good, but you also have to take into consideration CPU and really technical stuff. If you're working at 96, the file's gonna be huge, right? So you're going to be going through a lot more hard drives. So I think there's a time and a place to use 96. If you're tracking string instruments or really, a ton of live stuff. But I feel like 48's a pretty standard, it's a good compromise between good quality and also not giant file size. And also your CPU isn't going to explode. Even I have a Mac Studio and I got something to mix the other day at 96 and it was good up until a certain point, and I was like, all right. So, all things taken into consideration. Sorry, my dog's barking.
It's like your snare sounds like shit.
Really quick, I'll be right back. That's my input on sample rate.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, that's great. Did you want to go next, Brandon?
I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, I basically agree with everything. I usually work in 48. I used to work a lot more in 96, but then my computer it was just too annoying to work in 96. And then I'd have to, convert my sessions down to 48 to mix. And it was just a whole process. I'm I'm just going to record in 48. And if I need to convert down from there, I can, but usually I'm good.
Yeah, for me, I kind of float between 48 and 96. I've got the M1 Studio Max, so I haven't had too many issues on the old school throughput concerns you used to have, solid state drives, fast enough processor. That's fine. I mean, especially for the tracking side, I'm totally with Mike on that. Track at the highest possible rate you can, just to get it. I mean, if you're spending all that time, you're dialing in tones, then get it as close to the actual source as possible. I mean, we try to ping Analog and get him to come on and tell us how we're all mathematically wrong on stuff. But yeah, get it as wide open, the highest possible frequency range. And then, but I would say, yeah, for sure. Like when it comes down to mixing, it's probably not as pertinent. I mean, those are the things that are probably more bit depth relevant as it pertains to how like plugins are going to process some things. Um, but I would also have like, anybody that's like really curious about it, like what is the final format that it's going to be in? And oftentimes that can drive something. I mean, 48K is a pretty safe way to go, and then that way you never have to downsample anything. You never have to convert. You never have any of those weird issues on it. So yeah, maybe you can like old school days of like doing DVD stuff, or then like Blu-ray, and like sample rates would change, and you'd be like, you get that weirdo that does 88.1 and they say it sounds better, or 88.2 and they say it sounds better. I'm like, okay, well, if you say so.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Like, I mean, I think that you can feel stuff. Let's say if you're doing, you hear something that was evenly tracked at 44.1, and then let's say you did another exact split but tracked at 96. Maybe it's the air, maybe it's just a perceived thing that you get, but it's all those little bits, I think, that certainly would add up on the front end. Because last bit, sorry, I'm going to hog this. It's like you get a lot of people that there's two camps that are like, well, it doesn't even really matter, it's going to all get smashed down to some compressed format, and they're going to be listening through buds, through some DSP, or through streaming satellite, something or other. So why does it even matter? And like my thought process always is, it matters even more to record at the highest possible rate, to mix at the highest possible rate, to have it as big and as wide and as open as possible, because it's going to get squished. If it's kind of junky up front, and then it's already smashed, and then by the time it hits, Sirius XM, and you're listening to it, and you're like, God, this sounds tiny,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my thought.
The other thing I consider is like, and this is more niche, but like, for projects that are being done in Atmos after the fact, like Atmos is all at 48. Like you have to be at 48. So like, that's a big part of like, for me, why. I mean, first off, I mix at whatever sample rate it's given to me. And I'm not saying I do this, but I know a lot of mixers at a certain level. If it's above 48, they'll always downsample. I know a lot of guys that do that. I won't put names out there, but a lot of guys in the pop world, at least, in the modern commercial world, will downsample anyway. For certain projects, of course. But Atmos is at 48. Could be at 96, but there's limitations, and everybody I know is mixing Atmos in 48. So like, if the project is started in stereo, or at least recorded at 96 and then mixed at 48 or something, Atmos is going to be at 48. So like, that's another reason why for me it's a good thing. But from a mixing perspective, I mix at whatever sample rate it's sent to me. Like I had a project that I just finished that was sent to me at 44. Mixed the whole thing at 44, and in the very end, the label was like, "Great, send over everything at 96." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I mean, okay, there's not gonna be anything up there, but if that's what you want, cool." And I think mastering ended up doing it in the analog world anyway, and kind of added some information up top. But yeah, I don't usually upsample something if I don't have to, especially like working all in the box now. Like I don't find the need, with oversampling and all that. I don't find the need to upsample anything anymore. I think back in the day, if you were working on, or even now, if you're working with analog gear, like upsampling to 96 when you're mixing and then printing a new track at 96, well, obviously, whatever. But anyway, now I'm rambling on. But that's whatever it's sent to me at, I mix at. But 48 seems to be a good number, especially with Atmos.
Did you want to address that comment real quick? Because I was gonna say we should cover that. I think that's
like. This is where my technical, like, if you're working at 96, you have up to what, 48,000 hertz, right? Is that right? So like, there's up top is like all the information above. So if you're working at, let's say you're working at 48, basically you can manipulate top end up to 24 kilohertz, right? If you're working at 96, the information from 24 kilohertz up to 48 kilohertz is up there. So like adding information up top, what I mean by that is like, if I mix the record at 48 and then upsample it to 96, there's not going to be any information from 24 to. I'm explaining this terribly. So basically, like if you work in the analog world and you upsample something at 96 and then you add top end, you're going to add information in that frequency range that was missing at 48. Does that make sense? I'm probably explaining this horribly, but somebody help me out here.
You've got for the nerds out there the Nyquist
super
theorem, and it's essentially whatever the sample rate is. There's a lot of math, but you can think about it as the maximum frequency you can capture at that rate, and it's dependent upon what you record it at. If you record at 48 kilohertz, the maximum frequency you can capture is 24K. So 24,000 cycles. And so that's like when you're adding, that's all the airband type stuff.
Right.
And then so if you have to upsample to 96, that space and the file size, but you're actually writing a bunch of zeros for everything above like 24,001 up to 48. So it's like you're adding information for the file size and to accommodate the sample rate, but there's actually no information there.
It's
unless
like
unless you actually add it in somehow, and you're like maybe trying to take like super ultra high frequency harmonics and add that. But yeah, I think again that's why like recording high, and you can go back and listen to a lot of like these 50s and 60s Deutsche Grammophon, Berlin Philharmonic recordings, these beautiful analog classical recordings, and put them through like an RTA, and you'll see crazy high information that was on like the original recordings. You might not be able to hear it, but you can perceive it's there. That's the air around everything. Yeah. So,
and that's why like he acts like Joey acts like, how would you add it? Like in the case I was talking about, like when I sent the 96K file over to mastering, but I mixed that 44, all those zeros from the top end that wasn't there. If he mastered it in the analog world and he added, like a Mog EQ, right? He added like the air band, just lifting up that band will extend the top end out a little bit. So it's almost like he's adding information with analog gear. You can do it in the box too, really. It's adding information up there is literally just passing, and a lot of times it can be noise. Like if you pass it through a compressor that has a ton of, or any analog gear that has like hiss, that noise will, fill in the gaps in the super top end. It can be an air band on a Mog. It could be anything. So that's kind of what I meant by like, filling in that space up top or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, like any processing you do with analog gear, like analog gear tends to not have a limit of frequencies, like in the same way that digital does. Like in some ways, like yes, analog gear has like a limit of frequencies, but it's usually a lot higher than what the digital domain is. So like even just running anything through it, like you said, the noise, like the natural noise floor of that gear is going to be making stuff exist way above 20K, way above 48K, way above whatever, you know what I mean? And then not to mention if you add harmonics, like if you do any kind of anything with like a tube or a transformer, like you're adding harmonics up there too. So
yeah, for sure.
And then when you resample it, when you re-record that back into your DAW, you're capturing all that shit in 96 or whatever sample rate.
Yeah, most of the mastering guys that I know will all master something, but I mean like the serious mastering people I know, like if they get a 48 project that needs to go to 96, like I would assume 100%, but I'll be safe and say 99% of the time, they are not like digitally upsampling. They are doing a 96K re-record of that processing or through their gear, and then the final capture is at 96K. So that, you know, two playbacks. You have one system where there's some hard disk, the output goes to the gear, gets processed, and all of that gets captured again at 96, and then they're monitoring the back end of 96.
We did have one more question, which I think is a great one too, from Tony, and it said, could an incorrect sample rate cause random clicks and pops that are not in that sound wave?
I don't know if it's an incorrect rate, perhaps. You might have, you have two different rates, and if you don't have something that is matching a session rate, I mean, I know a lot of, I think Logic does this, I know Luna does it. Like, you can bring in files of multiple sample rates, and it will sample rate convert to the rate of the session. But if you have two different sample rates, you're going to have a pitch thing that you're going to perceive for sure. More than anything, if you get clicks and pops, that's probably a clocking error, a sync error that's causing those to not line up. But you asked that question, and I was thinking about that because that just sort of happened on something I was listening to the other day, and it was actually a plugin, you know, the processing on it to where it's like you'll find, especially like, you know, auto tunes and things like that. I had like a bass track, and I just kind of strapped a really light thing on there just to kind of nudge it in so I could get some rough mixes off. And I was hearing like some weird clicking, and it was a low buffer size with a high CPU rate plugin causing it essentially to not keep up. So that wasn't even a sample rate thing. So I guess the answer is lots of things can cause clicks and pops if you're not giving your system, you know, just like you have to have headroom on a track and headroom on gear, you have to have headroom on your system as far as like the CPU utilization as well.
My memory is hitting me now. I think Brandon just kind of recently dealt with this, right? Didn't your sample rate like change in your session and it like cut it in halftime or something? Like slow it down?
That was the weirdest shit I've ever seen happen in my entire life. My session like changed sample rates by itself in between, like while I was working on it. Like one session file back up to the next, like 1 minute in between, it was 96 and then it went to 48 somehow. I didn't do anything. I didn't do a save copy. I just was working on it, and then all of a sudden it was in a different sample rate.
Is your interface maybe like you have a Carbon, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean the Carbon and the Matrix Studio are, you don't use Dadman, right?
No.
Okay, because I know sometimes like with mine, like if I change the clocking source from Digi, whatever, from the HD native to like internal, it can automatically change the sample rate. And but that, I don't even know if that would do it. That's weird.
Nah, you can't even open Pro Tools if the hardware doesn't match, like with the Carbon. It was just like the weirdest thing, because when I was troubleshooting it, I was like, the only thing that makes sense is the sample rate doesn't match up. But like the project was working for 98% of the time that I like had it running, like for like a couple of months or whatever. And then one day I just closed it and reopened it, and it was slow. Like it was the whole thing was slow and pitched down. And I was like, what is going on? And I like went back to look at what happened in the session file backups, and literally just from like 1 minute to the next minute, I opened one session and it was at 96, and then the next minute I opened it and it was like at 48, and I was like, how did this happen? It's actually an anomaly. I don't know what happened.
I've never even heard that happen anyway. That's so weird.
It's the weirdest thing ever.
Yeah, I remember. It just hit me. I was like, oh yeah, Brandon just went through that, and it made it was chopped and screwed now.
It was, I tell the artist, so that song just came out recently, and I tell the artist, I was like, we have to release the slow version. People seem to like that shit.
It's a chopped and screwed version.
Yeah.
Those do well.
You got to upgrade from Pro Tools LE, you know.
Oh my god.
Yes.
Well, I literally, I printed just like a little bit of the fucked session just so I can put it, once I fixed it and like had like a new session with all the correct shit. I just like put the printed version of that like slow one at the end, and I was like, hey, this should be like our outro, and she's like, no. I'm like, all right.
No. It's like, damn, it was worth a try.
I was worth a try. I was like, this shit's kind of hard.
It's kind of nice. Who was that again? What DJ did that? Help me out. He passed away. This is gonna kill me. This guy from Texas that did the chopped and screwed. Come on, Mike. You know him.
I'm not from Texas. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, like he did like that's all he did. He would just take tracks and like just like halftime them, and got super
I don't
famous.
know what you're talking about, but if you say his name, I'd be like, oh yeah, duh. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nobody in the chat knows who I'm talking about. Who's the guy from Texas that does it chopped and screwed?
Oh,
No, he passed away probably like 10 years, 15 years ago. But either way,
I'm gonna look it up. Be like we're on a podcast. I'm gonna go look it up.
DJ Screw.
DJ Screw, that's him right there. Chopped and screwed. That's it. That's it.
Chopped and screwed, duh.
He literally took every song from Texas and chopped and screwed it and like got uber famous.
I only knew that because I just Googled it.
Yeah. Thank you, Wikipedia.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Kristen, did you have anything to add to this? My apologies.
No problem. Actually, don't. I was just listening to you guys because I didn't have the opportunity to work in higher than 44.1. Because for electronic music, for me, it really depends on the genre that I'm mixing or producing. And for house music and EDM, for me, 41.1 is more than enough. Basically, the people that are hearing EDM, they're mostly either on iPhone, they're mostly in the clubs where it's mono, or they are doing on, those Bose or Marshall speakers that are also mono. So giving a lot of struggle and, recording in 48 and going back, mixing in 44 is not an added value for me. It's just wasting time. I think 48 and above does matter where the instruments are analog mostly, because most EDM is VST. Yeah. I'm the only probably or one of the freaks that use a lot of outboard gear and a lot of synths, but usually it's VST. And I think if you're producing rock, punk, jazz, I think that's where it really shines and makes a difference. But in terms of house music, EDM, it really doesn't, in my opinion. So
Sure.
It depends on the genre.
I think a good way to go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just saying, probably a lot of those samples were the original source was probably done at a super high rate, just to have like maximum capture, and then
it was downsampled.
My new metal band also maximum capture, and then then downsample
to 44.
Or so somebody has their different sample packs. Then you can get an upgrade, and then they could sell it to you again to buy the 48K version. Then later, it's like, oh, you got to get the new subscription. So now you can get like the 88.2s, and
Now you're locked in for life.
Yeah, totally. I got to use the sample.
Until now, I even did just one master. I'm not doing any mastering. I'm just doing production and mixing for my tracks. Mastering, I'm always giving out. Composition also. Songwriting is not me doing it. But the mastering I did until now, I was always requesting one master CD quality, because my tracks, I was more concerned about being played on systems and in clubs than on Spotify. But the last track I did, I said to that person who does the mastering all analog, I told him, just do another version for Spotify for -18 LUFS. And he did one. And yes, it makes a difference. So the penalty that you get from the limiter from Spotify sounds shit. So if you listen to the tracks on CD quality and the ones that are actually mastered for Spotify, there is a difference. And I'm always testing on earbuds, that shitty sound that you get from those plastic things. Yeah. That's the most people that hear your music through, so I always think about what is mostly people doing or hearing the music on, if it's, for me example, I do have a hi-fi system. Do I use it all the time? No, it's only when I'm using to listen to my records, and usually I'm listening to jazz, rock, so not electronic stuff. Electronic stuff is always going out to AirPods or stuff that doesn't really matter for me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the old mastered for iTunes or the the Apple digital masters.
Yeah.
Yeah, even so now that's like to get that stamp. I mean, it's got to be 4824 at a minimum. You know, the
Mhm.
higher the better. Yeah, that always comes into then now when you're giving that final product, and even though on one hand it's like, yeah, 44:1:16 is totally it's been more than fine for forever, but yeah, these other formats now are going to require the other sample rates, and like Mike was talking about with the Atmos, and then if you're doing
The Atmos, the
whatever
Dolby
the latest
changes
thing is going to be,
yeah.
yeah,
But in terms of Dolby and Atmos,
deliverables.
I'm gonna get now a lot of hate because I'm saying this. I'm pretty sure 99% of the people will hate me right now. I'm not a huge fan of Atmos because for me, it's the following. If I'm listening to a band, imagine you're back in the 70s, or even now, if you're somewhere out listening to your favorite band, do you hear it Atmos or do you hear it stereo?
No, Atmos sucks. I don't care.
And for me, it's
I'm with
like
you, Chris.
I,
I don't care. Atmos sucks.
I'm old school, right? So I would like to hear things the way they were until now. It didn't change, so I don't feel like the guitarist on the on the scene is going around me playing,
Right.
panning around me, right? He's in front. He's either left or right. He's not going around me. So I'm still a huge fan of stereo. That's why I like records. That's why I like, the system, stereo one in front of me. I can find the bass. I can find the drums. I know where the penning of the drums are. I don't look for that. That's Dolby Atmos makes sense for me if I'm looking at a movie,
Yeah.
soundtrack wise.
Yeah.
That's give me that 3D presence. But otherwise, I want to hear Pink Floyd the way I always listen to Pink Floyd in front of me.
The only thing I'll say, I agree. The only as somebody who works in Atmos, the only thing I'll say is that like, and I think we're slowly getting there, but because it's so new, like the point of Atmos in music, other than just marketing and corporations, whatever, like Atmos mixes, in my opinion, shouldn't be that different. Like if something's spinning around a room, then whoever did it did a really bad job of it. Like Atmos really, my opinion, should resemble the stereo version, but enhance it in a way that still makes sense for what the intent was. Like we don't need Atmos.
Totally
right?
agree with that.
We don't need
Totally
it. We
agree.
don't need that. Nobody asked for it, right? And I don't want to make this all about Atmos. We should have a whole talk about it one day because it's a whole conversation. But I agree with you. And like I said, and I have a lot of friends that also mix in Atmos, and we talk all the time, and it's stressful because we're all like, what are we doing? But
What?
I agree though. Like nobody's like, man, I wish I can hear Dark Side of the Moon. Actually, that's a bad example, but that would probably sound cool. But like certain, we don't need classic Beatles records panned around. Like half of those are in mono anyway. So like, or are so
Yeah.
weird in stereo that's whatever. But like, I agree. But I think Atmos, we being the creatives working at Atmos, kind of need to reel in like the experimentation phase of this format and really get it down to like, this is an enhanced version of what was perfected in stereo. And I'm saying
Yeah.
that from the perspective of somebody who still primarily does stereo mixing. And maybe that's why I'm even saying this, because I know what goes into a stereo mix, and how easy it is to ruin that. So
I didn't do any Dolby Atmos mixes until now, but I saw a lot of YouTubers who actually are also mixing engineers and masters engineers, and they were talking about penning the strings like left and right and behind, and I was like, dude, like if you're doing in a soundtrack, that definitely makes sense, but I don't feel like the guitarist will stand behind me and drop the guitar and then pen left and right. He will be always in front of me. And what you said, Michael, totally agree on that. So if you can give me the stereo experience, but enhanced, then I'm totally on board with the Dolby Atmos.
yeah,
But it should reflect the reality, not artificial. Like I said, old school.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of like live record and broadcast stuff, and it makes me think about some of the, and a few that ended up getting mixed down for like 5.1 and 7.1, and the best mixes the as far as that I felt that I was putting out, with that type of format. Like, say you're going in and you're doing a big haul, so you're taking a full split from whatever the ensemble is, and I'll probably put up 4 to 8, 2-pair sets of audience mics all throughout the venue, capturing that from different areas. And I think I would say that listening live, you are listening in surround. It's not full stereo, like as in there's a null behind you. You're hearing the sound as you're perceiving it from the front, but it is coming, and you're hearing things from the side. You're hearing how the PA hits all the way to the back of the wall and then starting to come back to you. So I think, I definitely.
But that's the bouncing. That's not the penning.
Oh, 100%. That's what I'm saying. Is like being able to capture the sound as you would hear it from the front, and then also capture what is happening behind you, and placing that in a mix. I think that's cool. That gives you that enhanced stereo
Totally
thing you're talking about. Yeah, but like putting the snare on top, and like.
I don't think
That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's doing that anymore. That's like the early days of that.
I think in the beginning, everybody was like, and myself included, were like, "What do we do? Like, what is this?" And I feel like, as we keep kind of like doing more and more, I think we're getting more and more confused about how to make this work. But at least the people mixing it, because I have these conversations all the time where like, what are we doing? But like, I think we're starting. I mean, it's been a couple of years now, right? That it's been out, and at least it's been being mixed like behind the scenes. And the tough part about Atmos, right, is that, again, this is getting kind of down a rabbit hole with this, but like, what are we mixing for, right? Because I'm referencing the stereo master when I'm doing Atmos in my room, right? So I'm like A-Bing it constantly. And most of the stuff I'm doing in Atmos are things that I've done in stereo. I've done stuff that I haven't done in stereo, but I prefer really only doing stuff that I've done in stereo because I know the record and I know what went into it and all that, blah, blah, blah. But the most difficult part, and I think this is why we have these kind of wide range of Atmos mixes where some sound really cool in headphones and some sound like crap, is because as mixers, it's like, what are we mixing for? Are we mixing for the room? Are we mixing for headphones? Are we mixing specifically headphones for Apple, which is a totally different sound than mixing for headphones for Tidal or Amazon? Because one's an Apple binaural version, which is spatial audio. One is Dolby's binaural version. Both of them sound totally different. So you have to think like, it would almost be like, oh man, it's like, the best way to describe it, if people don't know, it's like spatial audio. It's like putting a room reverb, right, on your mix bus in stereo, like a short room, right? Like one preset, like a large wood room, right, on your mix bus, right, in stereo, and then making it sound really good, like as your last insert, so everything goes through that, and then making it sound really, really, really good in that large wood room, right? That would be spatial audio. And then after that, you take that off, and then you put like a short tile room, which sonically, as we know, sounds totally different. That's the Dolby version. We need one mix that sounds really good in both of those. How do you do that? Right? Like it's impossible, right? So what's happening is what we're doing in the mix stage is we're like, everybody wants to prioritize spatial audio right now because spatial audio is Apple is really what's kind of pushing this, right? But Tidal and Amazon don't have spatial audio. They have true Dolby. So what are we doing? And then on top of that, we have this room, like I have an Atmos room with speakers and all this. The room is a whole other format that we have to make it sound good in. Because when it plays back on sound bars and the Apple thing, the pod, whatever, like, so you get what I'm saying? So it's really, really, really difficult as in the mix stage to like, what are we prioritizing? In stereo, it's like, we're making it sound good in left and right. And we've been doing this for how many decades now where we know all the tricks, right? You're kicking your snare and your lead vocal and your bass are in the center. That's going to be punch and translate, right? You spread stuff out, you pan it left, or whatever. We know what we're doing in stereo. There is none of that for Atmos. So sorry, I said I didn't want to go on about Atmos, but that's why we're getting. It's so difficult to produce these mixes that sound great to everybody, and you're hearing like you listen to some songs and you're like, oh, this is great. Like they really just expanded the stereo field in headphones. It sounds really cool. Then you listen to another one and like major commercial records, and you listen to another one, and you're like, ugh, what the hell? And then, but then I listen in the room to that one. I'm like, oh, that the one that sounds horrible in headphones sounds great in the room. But so you can get where I'm going, right? Like it's really difficult to figure out what are we mixing this for, and what is going to be the final like resting place of this file, and there is no answer. So anyway, it's tough. I'm kind of just venting, but I'm also explaining like why we have such a wide range of results, because and if Spotify, if and when they do it, what are they going to do? Are they going to create their own binaural process like spatial audio? Are they going to use Dolby? Like,
What do you think the end goal of Atmos is? Do you think that it's trying to replace stereo, or is it just going to be a different listening experience?
I don't think it'll ever replace stereo. I don't think it'll ever do that. I mean, maybe in like 20, 30 years if technology gets that great. Because the whole point of Atmos is this, right? In a nutshell, what Dolby Atmos is, it's a format that you can essentially up mix and down mix, and it can play back on different formats. So if I mix in Atmos on I have a 714 rig now. The one Atmos file can play back in stereo. It can play back in the movie theater with 40 speakers. It's one file that you can change the playback size, right? That's a point of Atmos, really. So, do I think there will be a point where we mix one, like the record is ready to be mixed, we mix it in Atmos only, and then they just use the 2.0 down mix, which is stereo? People have talked about that. I don't think that'll happen because it doesn't quite sound the same. And that's why we're mixing Atmos. The majority of the Atmos projects that we're doing, we need to mix in the stereo first so that we can make stems. So that all the stuff that we do on the mix bus and all the stuff that we do in stereo, that's where the sound of the record comes in. And in Atmos, we're taking stems, very detailed 40, 50 stems, 60 stems of it, and trying not to change that. But, I think long term, I have no idea. I don't know. I don't think anybody does. I think it's a lot of corporate decisions have been made. I think part of it is to sell headphones. I think part of it is just, it's all about money at the end of the day. Let's be honest here. But
There's one thing. My bad. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's it. That's all I was going to say.
If there's one observation I'll make is this. I went to NAMM last year, which was April, so basically a year. Atmos was everywhere. Every company's doing it. They had the Tesla car there. I mean, you couldn't get away from it. Then the NAMM show in December, which was in New York, Atmos wasn't really anywhere. And I find that to be super interesting when you look at it and observe. It's like, what is going on here? And when I say it was everywhere, I mean Neumann had a room. That was probably the most experience I had with Atmos, other than going to Dan's room and actually seeing him mix it.
Yeah.
But I sat in on like a 3-hour presentation in the Neumann room and listened to all these Atmos mixes and these engineers doing them. And by the way, Christian, I'll side with you. Like when I was listening to it, I was like, sometimes guitars are hitting the top of my head, and I'm like, this is confusing the crap out of me. So it really did happen to me too. I was like, I don't know about this, but I don't know if there's any significance to what I just said there. It's just an observation of noticing that, the show in April, just Atmos everywhere. You can't get away from it. And then in December, it's kind of like, well, we're not going to talk about it anymore.
That's for sure. No, I think that's a big part of it. People are saying that the push initially came from Apple, and there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that, I don't know if it's public knowledge or not, so I'm not going to say it, but there's a lot of push from them to get this done, and then that's gonna kind of bleed over into corporations going, okay, now this is being done. Let's sell Atmos speakers, and let's sell affordable this, and it's all going to trickle down to all these other companies, and it's all going to be at the end of the day like corporate greed and all that, whatever. But I'm not surprised that by what you're saying. Like it was only a because like when I got into Atmos, it was probably 3 years ago, and like there was like two interfaces you could get, or three, and there was only like I went when I first got it, I went the Cali route with speakers, and those were affordable. But like now, if you go on Sweetwater, like every single speaker company has like Atmos packages, right? That wasn't even a thing when I first did it, and it was like either you go PMC or you go Cali. Like you spend a ton of money or you save money. And I was like, I'm not spending a ton of money right now. I don't even know what this is. Now it's everywhere, right? There's a
For
million interfaces, which is good, but that's I don't know. It's just still the Wild West though in general.
It is,
in
man.
my in
Just
my
interesting.
opinion, in my
Go ahead.
opinion, I see the Dolby almost like the electric car. Like when Tesla came out for the first time, like you don't have the infrastructure to sustain that car because imagine you want to, I'm talking about Europe right now, right? So you want to go across 3 countries. You need to make a plan to identify which are the spots where you can, fill up because it's not like gas. So in the beginning, there was no infrastructure. Now, as infrastructure comes along, you see more and more electric cars on the way. And I think it will come to a point where 90% of the planet will go electric, and the gas cars. So they are still the old school that's still analog. That will become like luxus, like luxury stuff. For me, you will see like probably a car that you see now with manual. The German word is coming in my mind, but not the English one. Manual, how do you call it when you change gear?
Stick shift.
Gearbox. Yes, the manual shift. That's will become like history, and only the people who can afford to pay the gas taxes will be able to afford to have one because electric will be enforced. So I think Dolby Atmos is on the same route. So now, in the beginning, like you said, Michael, you cannot afford one. Now it's getting more affordable, so more and more people are getting into Dolby Atmos mixing, and stereo is being less and less. But I think stereo will never die, in my opinion. And as long as you still have the old records, you still have vinyl, records is still there. And if it would be me, it can be the best mix in Atmos. If I'm on a desert island, I will still take Pink Floyd, the original pressing, with me on vinyl. So I will die with vinyl. That's
You
it.
know, this gives me sort of two thoughts, and for Mike, especially what you were saying. And I'm sure this is almost one of those things that somebody on a very technical side, obviously, when we started coming up with the very, very, beginning roots of, some type of spatial audio with quadraphonic sound, and then 5.1, 7.1, all this stuff up to Atmos. Like that's in a way, it almost feels like it's a bit of a science project for people that's kind of like their thing of just trying to do that. And it might not even be really for an artistic purpose. But then now you're seeing it like, why was it so hot for like 6 months? And the labels and the manufacturing side see an opportunity, I'm sure, to like, well, someone's doing Atmos, so we got to do it. It's like like a parallel to the new loudness war.
Yeah.
This record has an Atmos and our record doesn't have an Atmos, so we got to get an Atmos because the kids, they really want the Atmos. Who knows where it's gonna go? I don't necessarily know if it's not artistically motivated. That for me, that's my sensation at its root. It's a technological motivation and probably a financial. And I don't mind them like, hey, cool, let's like, remember when like super audio CDs came out and enhanced this and enhanced that. I mean, oh, cool, it's another version of something. But Rob, you said about like the guitar over your head, and this is why for sure like stereo is not going to die, and the main reason it's not going to die is provided that we all were born healthy. We have 2 ears,
Right.
and you will experience every sound in your life through 2 ears. And you perceive things from front to back, from top to bottom, from left to right. you have, in a sense, a type of 360 perception. That's why we can perceive where sound comes from, and why when we're used to hearing something in a certain manner live, acoustically, like we're talking about going to see a live band, so where you might not know what it is when you listen to it, but you're like, this sounds narrow, or it sounds way too wide, or something of that nature. Putting the guitar over the head, those are weird things, and I've always like tried to approach mixes, and especially doing stuff on the live side, is I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to take what is given to me and just make it a little bigger, make it a little wider, make it a little bit. Somebody earlier said something like cinematic. You can make cinematic mixes without completely altering the sort of perception of where things should naturally go. And even like, you go to old, like some of those old early Blue Note stereo records where like bass and saxophone were on one side and piano and drums were on the other side. And you might see that sort of in an ensemble, and they're sort of like, well, how do we figure out these two speakers? But eventually they're like, yeah, some of those early stereo records were kind of kooky as far as how they translate to a listener. But yeah, I mean, yeah, just kind of the thoughts off my head. But I was going to ask, like, for your non-music friends, your non-musician friends, your non-engineering friends, like, who do you know that has a stereo at their house with like two well-positioned speakers? I mean, I remember like going over to somebody's house where they would have like their stereo, and one speaker's up on a shelf and another one's like next to the couch.
One's 2 feet tall, the other one's 6 feet tall.
yeah, and you walk in there like, well, the center image is a little, like it's a little skewed. Like nobody does that, but like, yeah, I don't even know like that many people that have, home stereo systems anymore.
Yeah.
I wish they did, but
yeah, it's sound bars now. It's and there's someone,
which are probably more stereo correct than
yes,
a lot of people place in their Iowa, or their old JVC one box, they got it for Christmas.
They put the EQ on these things and they're letting people EQ them. Like, don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Don't, no.
Look, it's got a phantom center,
But bombs boosting the bass on everything. She's like, the bass is too loud. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to get it to bump, Mom.
Well, and this person's mentioning VR, virtual reality, right? And maybe, the more and more I think about that, right? And when you kind of correlate like us being online and streaming and whatnot, there might be some sense of that's involved in it, right? That music will be, perceived through like virtual reality, right? So if we put on these goggles and we're now we're at a concert per se, right? And we're looking at them directly and we're perceiving it from the stereo field, but maybe you turn your head, right? And then the whole thing turns and now it's behind you. So maybe that's where it might make sense to me. And maybe that has something to do with it. Now that
that's like I've met one person that's in the gaming audio world. Maybe you guys know more than that's a thing there. And I mean, you sit there and you play some Call of Duty or whatever it is, and you're listening on and you're watching it, and your character pans, and the sound that was here is now here. Like that's all cool. I mean, that's kind of there. And I mean, there's different like engines that are separate from like the Dolby side. I mean, maybe one day all that will sort of coalesce into one universal 360 codec that everybody could use. Mm-hmm. Maybe that would also help with what Mike was saying with like, well, title and this is different than, the Apple was different than whatever, We got to get past that format issue first, I think, before any of this really takes off.
That's definitely a big part of it, and I think the other thing that is happening, and it's also annoying to people mixing, is like, Apple's spatial audio algorithm is constantly changing, improving, right? So like, that's a good thing, but it's also difficult because if you make it sound good in, you know, in spatial audio a year ago, it might sound a little bit different today. So like, I think it's just so early. It's still so early in the process to really determine where it's going. I don't think it's ever going to overtake stereo ever. Stereo is always going to be stereo. But I don't think Atmos is actually going anywhere. I don't know where it's going, but it's not going away. I think that's probably a safe bet, because it's also like comparing it to like quadraphonic and 5.1. The biggest difference is like you don't need a pair of headphones with 4 drivers, right? You don't need
Right.
that. You and with outside of spatial audio, with straight up Dolby binaural, you can use any headphone, wired, whatever. So like whether people like it or not, that's a subjective thing. The objective part of it is that it is a format that will work in headphones. And if that's what they're pushing, we as creatives don't really have a say in that. That's just the fact, right? Like we can all get together and be like, we're done with this, but it doesn't really work that way. It just doesn't, because there are plenty of people that'll be like, all right, well, they don't want to do it. I'll make it work.
Right. Yeah, it's great. Like
you know,
you adapted a bit early. I mean, there's a lot of people that said like, hey, you know, and you went an economical route with the Cali stuff.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, and then people are calling you, I'm assuming, to do Atmos, right?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of my whole reason of doing it, other than advice from just other peers, was like I was making stems for other people to do Atmos mixes of my stereo mixes, and this is before I had like the Bounce Factory from Sheps, and I was sitting there doing it. Took forever, and like I'm like, this is ridiculous. And then I would hear some of the mixes that that I did in stereo in Atmos that somebody else did, and I was like, ugh, like what is this, you know? And then so that was my reasoning, was like, if I'm gonna spend all this time making stems and then hand this mix off that we spent a week on that someone's gonna do in 4 hours, like I might as well just do it myself. Like I was kidding with my friend the other day. I was like, if someone's gonna mess up this record in Atmos, I want to be the one to mess it up. Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like I'd rather be the one to mess it up than to have somebody else mess it up in their way, because I know what went into that. So I was an early adopter, early-ish. I wasn't the earliest, but I was in Nashville. I was one of the earlier people. There was only a handful of other people doing it that I was aware of. But it was more like, it was a gamble. Like, let's just do it. Let's do it affordable. Like now I'm starting to swap out my Calis. I'm adding some more ATC slowly. I'm not doing the whole room, no way. But my front's going to be all ATC. But like, I would never invest in that early on, because it was like a gamble. It's still kind of a gamble, but I just don't think it's going anywhere. But yeah, I think it's more about like being safe in the future than being like, you know, I'm going to make a lot of money right now on this. Like that was not my plan, and it certainly did not happen. No way. It took a little bit before I started getting work in Atmos. So I also had to work the kinks side and like learn about it. I couldn't expect to charge for something that I had no idea how to do, you know? So I think that was a part of it too. But who knows?
I think,
yeah, you go, Brandon.
But, I was gonna say, I think Atmos could be cooler from a, like, I think the thing is, like, it needs to be consumer driven. Like, people need to want it for it to really be driven from a creative side, like we're saying. Like, I think if Sean Everett produces an album specifically for Atmos and like people listen to it specifically for that, then, you know, consumers might be like, oh, that's kind of sick. You know what I mean? But like, I did an Atmos mix in AirPods recently just to see if I could. And my thought process was like, well, most people are going to be listening in like AirPods. If I imagine anybody listening to Atmos, it's like just trying to, you know what I mean? Just trying to do some spatial audio shit. But what I didn't know, Michael, is what you're saying is like the algorithms are different for binaural from Apple and Dolby, and I'm like monitoring the Dolby binaural, so I'm like, okay, well, this is weird. And then like I told the artist, I was like, all right, I just did the Atmos, and she was like, can I hear it? I'm like, actually, I don't think you can hear it unless you have the Dolby renderer. Like,
Right.
They can. You have to send it to them as an MP4. Did you do it in Logic, by the way?
No.
So this is a good experiment. If you have Logic, and I mean, I don't use Logic, but I have it and I've done this. So if you do an Atmos mix in Logic, right? Because they have the spatial renderer in there. But what's cool is they have the Dolby and the spatial, and it's like one click to do both. So like I've been telling people this, like a really good experiment, like this will blow your mind, Brandon. Do just do something for fun in Atmos, like in AirPods, and do it all through the spatial thing, the spatial binaural mix, and then swap over to the Dolby binaural, the Dolby renderer, and it's one click, and you're gonna be like, oh my god, like it's night and day, right? So,
Wow.
and there are some tricks that I've learned to kind of get them close, but they're still so different. But and then the way to get it to them is you have to basically save it, bounce it down, and then convert that to an MP4, which I think in Logic you can do. If you do it in Pro Tools, you have to basically bounce it, import it into the external renderer, and then save that as an MP4, and then you have to save that in your iCloud drive, right? You send out the MP4 to your iCloud account, then you have to share that link with somebody and make sure they listen to it on AirPods on an Apple device. It's a headache. There's one other way to do it too, with the I think is it Streamly? What's that one streaming? HB is a part of it. I think it's called
Oh, it's
Streamly or
Oh,
something. Hold on, let me look it up.
Simply. It's Samply.
Samply. Streamly
Yeah.
Samply. They have it where you can basically upload the MP4 on there and then send it to somebody, and then as long as they're listening on AirPods, they can hear it in that. But again, like even having to explain this, it's a headache. But definitely, I encourage everybody, even if like in the chat, whatever. I encourage you, if you have Logic, just throw some stems in there. Listen only in headphones. Listen with the spatial audio renderer, and then swap between that and the Dolby renderer, and you're gonna be like, oh my god, I hear exactly what he's talking about. It's like it's not subtle. It's very, very obvious.
Can you load an ADM file into Logic
Yes.
and just monitor that?
Yeah. So I would just take your bounce or your ADM BWF, import that into Logic, and then literally just let me actually pull up in Logic. Let me see. Hopefully it doesn't make my computer explode.
My Logic is updated enough to have Atmos. I might have to update it. I'm still on what am I on? I'm on Catalina. So fucking far behind.
Leopard. Yeah.
You may need to-
Pro Tools LE.
Right.
I want to say that all this discussion makes sense for people like us, and probably the mix and the master will make a huge difference for the audiophile guys. But most people tend just to hear the track, and if the composition and if it has the hook, they will like it. If not, they will skip it. Nobody will care if you put it through. Rob, I'm always thinking about that. I'm investing so huge lot of money in Tegla with VCA compressor, SL Fusion to add that a little bit of analog, and nobody cares. If the track sounds good, I have a track that's completely in the box, completely VST, completely mixed in the box. It has 19,000 streams, 19,000, all organic, in 4 weeks or something like in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. And another track that's all analog, synth analog, processed all analog. It has only 15, and it had Google Ads on it. So that's what I'm saying. If the composition and the way it's built,
Yep.
it has a hook and the listener likes it, he will play it. If not, they will skip it. They will not care if it's analog, if it's through an SSL, if it's spatial, if it's not spatial, they will just skip it.
Oh, for
I
sure.
think most importantly,
That's a problem.
And you're 100% right, because the listener and I'm my wife, she's not a musician at all, and I'm always I try to use her perspective, and she's blatantly honest with me. She does not care about hurting my feelings, and that's what I love about her. So she'll tell me I don't like it or not, and it's usually the feeling. So how do you feel about the record? It's not even really the sound. It's how do you feel about it? And then the message of it, and the message could come in the form of composition or lyrics. The message will speak to you in terms of how the melody. When we say the guitar talks to you, right? It could literally speak to people in that way, and it delivers that message, or in the form of lyrics. And so when you're thinking of sound, it's like falling to the bottom of the importance list, and that to me, I've always said that's kind of a personal taste for engineers and producers. When people ask me about the big six all the time, I say it often, it's not going to make you mix better. It's just a personal, like personal choice of mine, a sound that I want, for my music. Doesn't mean that I'm going to get a bunch of listeners and, guaranteed success because I got a analog gear.
It's funny you say that, and I almost look at gear on the analog side. It's a tool to get out of the way of what the music is. And sometimes, we all know that a certain piece of gear has a certain characteristic that, again, if the song bites, it doesn't matter. But that gear and the gear selection and our sense of taste can help accentuate that, to take what is
Correct.
already great and then, add
Bring it to the
that
next level.
little bit of something that nobody's going to be able to quantify what that is, but you'll know when it's not there. I did want to, if you don't mind, Danny had talked about the clang. Are you guys hip to what clang is?
I'm not at all
That
educated.
that's on the live sound side. It is an immersive interface for in-ear monitoring. So this whole thing, like, the industry has come up with, well, like, how do we get it in the live world? I mean, there's people that are doing stuff, D&B, probably, I'm sure that Christian, you're familiar with them. Like, they do their soundscape system, which is essentially immersive live audio, where it's point source, multiple box. Think of Atmos in a live room, and you can put stuff like you do it in a theater, but they're doing it for live music. But the clang is for in-ears, and it allows you to go in, and I've never used it as a mixer. I've actually used it like as a player on gigs. You'll come in and then you'll see this graphical interface for your mix. So there's a lot of things you can do personal monitoring mixes on. Like, cool, I want to turn the kick up, the lead vocal down always. But now in Clang, it shows you a 3D thing sort of over a head to where you can pan it, and you can also give it a sense of depth. And it's one of those things that, like, well, that's cool, and it allows you as a player on stage. And one of the biggest gripes is people will have for in-ears is it sounds isolated. So now I can sit there and really look at my interface and dial in the rhythm guitar player who's standing right next to me. I can sort of pan him here, and I can put that other guitar player there. So if I hear them taking off or doing a solo, it's in the correct ear to my space on stage. I can look over and getting that audio cue for something's happening over there. You pay attention. That's all cool. The downside of it is not only it's a $10,000 engine plus licenses and all this other stuff. And when I went in to do a gig, and they're bring in my ears, I patch into the stuff, waiting to find just a normal interface to do my mix. Then I got to go through and like figure out where to pan all of this other stuff. And as a player, it was a total hassle. And I was like, man, I didn't want to deal with it. I just like panned it all in the middle. Fine, cool. Because I'm just like concerned about playing the gig. So it's like if you bought it and you had the same group of musicians, and it's also, I see it in a lot of house of worship, like audio installs, because I kind of feel bad for that particular market, but man, they are sold the latest and greatest of live gear all the time. You think that we buy stuff because like so-and-so had a plug-in. They're like, oh, this is going to totally change why your volunteer front of house mixer can't deliver a mix on stage, or the in-ears aren't good. Like, let's buy $20,000 of infrastructure, and it still doesn't solve the problem. But yeah, it's like, it's cool. And maybe that might even be a thing in studios at some point in time. There's tons of like the Aviom, the Hearbacks, all that stuff. The Behringer has one. Yeah, there's a ton. Avid sells their little PEQs, and so maybe that might be a thing to where you're trying to give that player, while you're tracking, a greater sense of space. So it doesn't just feel like, I'm the guy reading the chart and just turn bass up so I can make sure I'm locked into it. Maybe I can see that, but again, it's like the industry said, oh, immersive is the way we're going to go in every aspect of it. Car audio, live sound, movie stuff, people that are just in sound design. Everybody's like, they sort of bit into it. And I don't know if anybody was asking for it. It's like, I don't know, it's weird. But yeah, answering his question, Clang is cool, but it's not good for one-off gigs. That's for sure. Like, you have to take time to dial it in. And when you're just sitting there like, cool, I come into play some show, I'm reading down the charts. I don't want to sit there and futz around with the 360 perception of where they're putting the rhythm guitar part that I just need to cue in for time.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't even know it existed, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm looking at Sweetwater. It's like the main interface, 10 grand plus, like, if you want to get the Digico card or all the licensing and the controllers, like, you can buy the Aviom stuff and even the new stuff, and the controllers are, you have to buy the interface, but you get 32 channels that can come down on a box. And I think the interfaces are $400 or $500.
Imagine how much you can buy
like
for that money.
$1,300 each for the Clang interface, and it's a lot of bread. For what was the other thing that kind of came out? This isn't immersive, but wasn't it also called Clang?
Wasn't that for the tape machines?
Yeah, like you could run through your 24-track machine.
Yeah, and print right back into Pro Tools. Yeah, I've used
and that way you could sit there and use the same tape, and you're going essentially, I think, off the repro head.
Yeah, so you print the tape, but then you immediately dump it right back into Pro Tools.
Yeah, you just keep looping it, and then you could have, I want drums to be 15, on 456, and then I want the vocals to be 30 ips on G9, or, something like that.
It was. I worked in a studio that had one of those. It was cool. It was very expensive too. It was very and it was cool because you can take advantage of tracking the tape, but it immediately dumped into Pro Tools and then you can edit it. But that didn't really. I know some places that have them, but I don't think that really stuck.
It was I/O for tape basically, but now we can just use the Studer plug.
Right. I have to run. I just wanted to show you really quickly, just before I run. This is what I was talking about in Logic. If you go to Logic and then the Atmos plugin on it, this is the renderer. Oh wait, can you guys see it? Sorry.
Oh no, I can.
This is the renderer. Just to show you really quickly. There it is. So this is the renderer in it. If you go between, you can literally go between Apple Renderer and Dolby Renderer, and it changes them immediately. So if you just to go back to that really quickly before I run, that's how easy it is. I do think you need to be on, what am I on? I'm on Ventura. I don't know if you need to be on Ventura or there is an OS you need to be on, but it's really easy. It's literally just going between those two. I recommend if you're interested to even understand the difference, just do it that way. And so it took me that long to open up Logic because it had to load all the plugins. This entire time I've been trying to.
Really?
I hate that.
I don't open it that often, but I gotta run, guys. So I didn't want to interrupt or be rude. So, thanks for having me again. I'll talk to you guys next week.
See you.
Take care. Cheers.
Yeah. I gotta run too. I gotta start
doing
stuff.
Right on, buddy. Appreciate you stepping in. Have a good one, man.
See you guys later.
Take care.
We did get another question. I don't know how we would dive into this. These are always really tricky ones for me, but how should I put this? So the person just wants beginner tips for mixing and mastering, right? Obviously, I don't think you should worry about mastering at all as a beginner. Just don't get that out of your head. That's definitely way down the road. But if you were to have say a class today of students and it's their first day, how would you approach it?
With the subject of
just starting
mixing 101.
Yeah, say we already have a produced track, we already have everything put together, and then we're just diving into the mix. What would we start with?
It's funny as I'm gonna do I'm gonna follow in your footsteps. I'm gonna do like a live today around 1, like taking a mix, this exact type of thing. Um,
Beautiful.
but I'm old school. I'll start with it's something that is sent to me. We've done the front end work of ensuring that all the tracks are labeled appropriately. Starting first being organized. From an administrative standpoint, I think helps your musicality be organized. Like it's helpful to know that guitar 1 is actually electric and guitar 2 is acoustic and guitar 3 really is mandolin. So then when you hear those sounds, you can reach for the fader, you can reach for the mouse and know how to properly balance that. I look at stuff as if can I put the faders up at unity and play and just let it go, and then I'll wait until I hear one thing that really either, and it's usually that it's too loud, abnormally too loud, like you'll hear some shaker. The guy Kingdom Come, he was doing this yesterday, and it was like he got a new track in, and then there's one shaker part that really they didn't record it hot, but it's designed to probably be like -20. And as soon as you hit that spot, this thing just pokes out of the middle, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna gain balance that stuff so I can play it at a unity level mix, and I'm not peaking my master bus with no processing on it. That's the first thing of just ensuring that, all right, could I put the faders up and is it reasonable from a listening perspective, aside of taste? I mean, obviously, if something is ripping your ears off, or if you see something that has, that there's something on the track and like the wave is this big and you have to sit there and solo it and turn it way up, then sometimes you need to get more level. So that's the first thing that I would do with anybody is gain balance all the way across to ensure that everything is what it's supposed to be. What's on the track, and then make sure that nothing is clipping or peaking your two bus. I think that in itself allows you to start then making those creative decisions. That would be the first class is create a mix and just gain balance without touching the faders, without any processing. That would be my first step.
You have anything you want to add to this, Christian?
How I would do it now, and how I didn't do it for my first tracks, would be to color code, to organize, to group.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So basically to set your stage for the mixing phase. Then again, gain stage. So at a 0 dBFS, export and render it the production version. So I always have that as a reference for where I started. So what was the initial, production version of the artist?
Yeah, that's a good
bounce
tip.
It down, and then. But again, these are tips that I've done it on my latest track. Never done it in the past, so always learning on it. Then I would always try to get, before going in the mixing stage, I will gain stage it again in my own version. So I will take again the drums, so balance it again. So I will put all the faders down and bring all the faders up one by one. So I have my version of balancing. And then before applying processing or the VSTs, I always consider two things. Is my VST a digital one, or is it an emulation of an analog one? And if it's an emulation of an analog one, I always put a meter before the plugin to make sure I'm always going in -18 dBFS, because that's usually the analog signal that should go through it. And always making sure that my mix bus is always at 0 VU. And why is that? Is because my mix bus always has my analog gear on it. So I always want to make sure I'm hitting them with 0 VU. And then I have a you have in Pro Tools, you have the master fader that it's pause fader. So I put that before my mix bus. So my master fader gets the input level and tells the mix bus how much I'm saturating that signal. So I'm hitting the pre-master with 0 VU, and then I'm going up if I need any more on saturating my analog gear.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah. Tell me
I-
that's after 2 years of making a lot of bad mixes and bad choices. So yeah, that's what I would do now.
yeah, it's a great approach. I mean, it's basically exactly what Brian said. I mean, I would argue that this is like 80% of the mix. Really is. Like once you get things balanced without touching anything, and I always say like at the input level because this is really important. Output input is different, and so when you say like you pull it down at the gain or the unity, our utility I believe is in Logic. We do the gain in Pro Tools, but pulling those down, making sure everything is sitting balanced without having to touch the mix. I don't know if y'all do this, but a lot of times in that phase, I'll be doing just panning, getting things in the space that they need to sit in. And I try to do this just exactly how both of you do it, but I don't really, I want it to sound like it's mixed. Of course it's going to be dry. You don't have the effects and so on and so forth, but you could get to a point where, if you are doing, your proper leveling, just as Brian mentioned, and getting everything spaced right, nothing's clipping, it really will sound mixed. And this, once you walk into the mix phase after that, I mean, it's almost a breeze.
Yeah.
One more thing
Go.
sorry, to go there. One thing I'm doing, I'm not sure if it's right or not, but it's working for me. I'm always mixing in my G bus and in my limiter. So I have a limiter that doesn't hit the wall, but it goes up to the wall. And before the limiter, I have the G bus compressor, which is analog. And I'm always mixing in through that. Because usually if I mix without the G bus compressor, then it's harder for me to put the G bus compressor and all that after it. So I always mix in the G bus compressor and in the limiter, because the limiter brings up all the stuff that I don't hear initially, because I did in the past. I put the limiter at the end, and when I put the limiter, it brought up stuff that I didn't hear in the mix. So that's why I'm always mixing in the limiter.
Yeah. No, please.
Well, like I was just going to ask you, like, what is your take on that? I do something actually kind of similar to that as well. So,
My take is I kind of do the opposite of that, and I used to go into I used to do that, and what I was finding is that oftentimes later on in the mix, when I would get things more balanced, that initial setting on some type of bus compression or limiting, I ended up having to change it, and not just about the amount of input to it, but I would find that wanting to bring things up might impact the way that the limiting is reacting. So I just turned it off at first, at least until I'm getting already, I'm sure there's no other tracks that are going to be added, and that like low end and things like that are managed up front. I mean, that's sort of like maybe step 3 is I do try to address the low end early just to get that sitting right. Because that for sure, depending upon if you have some kind of master bus thing that has a side chain high pass type deal, that the kick isn't just, if you're playing just the kick and your bus limiter is going wham wham, it's the input that you're setting to it, and then you start bringing things down, and it's like a pensado thing, like you just want to tap it just a little bit. Again, if you're talking about also sending something out to mastering. But yeah, I have all that stuff off until it's time to have it on. But I kind of want to be able to get the mix to a point to where I feel it stands on its own, and that I'm not, and what I'm hearing is just off the tracks. Like if something is getting over compressed, it's like, I know that it's not the master bus squashing something, it's an individual sort of channel thing or in a group type of a deal.
I think I missed out explaining something. So I I am mixing in the in the G bus and with the limiter, but after I'm finished with the drums. Drums, I'm always doing it
Oh, okay.
without anything on the mix
Yeah.
box because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
low end part, and
Right.
that's always hitting your G bus compressor. So
Right.
I'm always doing the compression, the parallel compression to the bus. So when I'm done with the drums, I'm going to process the rest of the instruments. I'm always mixing the G bus compressor because yes, I'm also using the sidechain, the sidechain low cut, and
Yeah.
I can show you right now on my. Give me a second, see if it's working. The rotating the camera. Let me know if you can see it.
Yep.
Here, I have the sidechain at 60 hertz. I have it at 120 hertz, or if I'm pushing those two buttons, I have the sidechain at 200 hertz. And depends on how much low end I have. I'm using one of those two or the 200, but very rarely the 200. I'm using mostly the 60 or the 120 hertz for mixing. And usually I don't put in the sidechain only at the end. So I'm not mixing with the sidechain on when I'm doing the mixing phase. Only when I'm done with the tracks and I'm at the final stage where I'm putting the processing on the final mix bus.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So
Yeah. Let me flip this real quick. Flip. So let me pop this off real quick. This is, if you want my, not secret sauce. So this is kind of what I have
Oh no.
a normal mix bus thing. I'm 10-1, you know, and not slow, but not super fast attack. This is kind of set for a track I was doing the other day. A lot of times, man, I'll leave it on the auto. And right now there's like no makeup, but I'm doing this a wet and dry. I'm doing about a 50% mix. That's where like the 10-1 kind of, you know, tames little things, but it's also not super squashy. But yeah, same thing. This is like the side chain. If I can get that to focus, yeah, it's about 100, you know, and so that's kind of where my general purpose when I insert that on.
that's on my wish list, on my shopping list. The
Yeah.
SSL one. I have the Fusion box, which I put always after the
Yep.
SSL G bus compressor. So after I have the Tegla, which is the G bus compressor, followed by the EQ. You can always choose EQ first and compress, or compress and EQ. And then I'm
Right.
going to the SSL Fusion and doing the SSL Fusion chain. And I think that gives the mix that gluing stuff that I need at the end.
For sure. I'm fixing my camera here real quick. Sorry, it's all getting all wobbly.
Yeah, and I will say this too for anybody listening. There technically is no right or wrong when it comes to this. And if I were to say anything, Christian, how you do it is this is how it's told to me. It's called top-down mixing. And so you would establish a sound that you have with a certain amount of plugins, and then you mix into them. And so that would already be, your starting point, right? And then they call it top-down, so the rest of it would
Correct.
be in place.
Following
And
after.
so yeah, and like I used to do the G bus afterwards. However, mine is a little different because I'm in the big 6 and it goes in parallel, so I only do a touch of it, kind of what Brian was showing. And I find that I get a better result typically if I do the G bus first, and then mix into it. But Brian also is correct that I've also found myself having to readjust my compression sometimes. I'm like, okay, it's a little too much.
I'm also adjusting it. I'm not saying it's set in stone. I'm just saying I'm
Yeah.
mixing into it, and I see
Yep.
as it goes how it sounds, right? But
Exactly.
now if I'm getting the SSL Big 6, I will use actually the Tegler on my drum bus, and I will mix into the SSL G bus compressor just to see how it makes a difference.
Yeah,
Here's
the one thing I like about and I'll show you. Let me grab my phone real quick and show everybody since we're showing off our setup.
It's like sharing. It's share time,
Yeah.
boys and girls.
Since we're sharing here. And mine is we all have unique setups, and that's what's cool about it is there's many ways to do this, and that's just something to always keep in mind. That these are just ideas that we share. And so, in the big 6 here, this is going to be my G bus, right? And so when I engage it, it's going to be with these 2 buttons. It goes in parallel with these knobs, and I literally could do a 50% mix on each individual track. And so that's what kind of makes it unique. And the way
Yeah.
that it adds to the signal, it starts from the bottom, and that's why I like it from the parallel. So it's lifting up all that bottom information. And I could just do a touch of if like the transients are poking out a bit, I could do a touch on it. So it's a little different from how we all do it, and it's just different ways to achieve that sound. But again, I don't like, and just what you said, Christian. Oh, my bad. My phone is not cooperating. But we sometimes I have to adjust the compression. So I definitely usually start with it, but I don't marry myself to it. If
Exactly. It's just a starting point,
Exactly.
The same way I do it on the compression. So usually I use the auto release on the mix bus. But nowadays I'm actually working in this one. I'm going to share the screen again. You see there, it has a cream option. It has an auto release and a cream option. That cream option is doing magic. So totally recommend this Tegla stuff. There is a lot of reviews out there on this particular compressor, and it's also a EQ. And you can also choose between compression first and EQ, or EQ and compression after,
That's nice.
Definitely makes a whole difference. There are also production tips, and Production Mix and Mix Plus TV also did a review on this one, and they all said it's amazing. So
Yeah, you said you have the Fusion as well.
That's. Give me a sec on that one.
And I've got a Fusion, and I was going to ask you, like,
yeah.
Are you using the limiter, the comp you just showed, on the insert point on the Fusion?
Great question on that one. Let me answer that one in a different way. Just give me a second to rotate my camera. I was thinking about doing the insert because that's the mid side of things, but I don't have enough inserts and outputs anymore because all my gear is now, I maxed out my out gear. So I'm using the usual stereo out, not the mid insert. But when I'm moving to the new studio, my plan is to get that mid insert into there, because from what I heard, everybody who's using SL Fusion, or everyone is using the mid insert, or it's pointing out to that.
I found that for me, I've used just the Bus Plus, no problem. 'Cause I've got everything. It's in the patch bay, so I've got the in and the out on both, and then I've got the insert, the send return on both. I think the Fusion has an insert point, and then if you select the insert, then you can make the insert regular stereo or mid side.
Correct.
The Bus Plus has a side chain input as well. So it has in and out, and then no insert on that. I don't know if you would insert onto a compressor. But yeah, so I've had really good luck, sometimes even just running through the Fusion, not using any of like the drive or the high frequency compressor or the EQ, but just running through there and then using the G-Bus or the Bus Plus in the insert slot. That seems to, for my ear, sound the best. Or it doesn't. It's in a way, it's almost the most transparent to me through that, and then I can really hear if I want to add some of that saturation, like through the drive circuit, the vintage drive. And if anybody has those SSL plugs, I will say that those plugs are pretty close. On a 1-for-1.
I have them as well. So
I think the difference is when you use them. I've actually tried to go through and replicate a mix through the Fusion, and then put the plugs in the same order with the exact same settings, and it's close. But I think there is it's not the same. It's just one of those when you get multiple circuits together.
Yeah,
and it has
it cannot be the same.
That's going to affect the way the electronics act.
The problem is the patch bay. I installed it just a couple of weeks ago, so a year after I set up the initial setup here, so I cannot go behind it. So I said, before getting everything out, replugging the patch bay, I'm moving anyway to a new studio, so I will patch it then. But
Yeah.
there are two
Dude,
things that I will use is the patch pay, and that I already have one. I need to buy another one because it's not enough. And there is another one called Matrix from Erica Synths. Do you know it?
mhm. I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never used it.
It's amazing what it can do. So you can route your pads and memorize a recall function of patching.
Yeah, what's there? There's another box. What is that? You know,
I do know it.
there used to be something way back in the day called the digital detangler for those that are into like vintage
Don't know it.
digital gear. It would take a bunch of your like AES, like if you were using uh, like an original L2, or everybody was using the like silly sonic maximizers or TC finalizers or the Vice. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. Not Weiss, but the Vice like EQ ones and all those digital
Yeah.
EQs and comps and all that stuff. Yeah, you could have you could just sit there and say, okay, I want what's first in this AES signal chain. Insert 1, then 4,
Yeah.
then 3. Yeah, so whatever that. Then I know there's a
The
patching box that's out there, and then the one you're talking about, you could have, and you
the
could
Erica
recall
Synth is
those settings.
not that expensive, it's like 500, 600 euros
Yeah.
or so in Europe. But if I would have the money, and Rob would say, Christian, I'm gonna send you 5,000 euros because you're just great and doing a great job, then I would definitely buy the digital patching bay.
Like
The digital one.
just getting
Then you
dusted.
can route
Yeah.
it whatever you wanted. So yeah, that would be my dream patch bay, the digital one,
What is
because you
that?
can route it whatever you want without cabling stuff. But yeah, Erica Synth and the traditional patch bay will do the stuff as well.
Total side note, and I don't mean like if you had any more you're going to add, I could bring this in later, but SSL stereo imager, and like I don't have the real one, but holy crap, that thing is amazing. And I don't know if either of you use it, but the shuffle on it, and then you could just hear the sides and dial it in. And I was using it yesterday, and I had
Right.
two. One of them had a lot of low end information, and when I would EQ it, it just like lost its life. So I'm like, okay, I have to, keep the integrity of the signal. How am I going to do it? And I was like, well, I'll just try to space it out, get it to live in its own space. And I used the shuffler, and it did it instantly. And that I don't know if,
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know if you've tried it at all, but like I really dove in it yesterday. It was like I was kind of in a flow state when it happened. Like there's times where I'll pull up plugins, I'm like, I can't really hear what's happening. That one, it was just clear, just hit me, and it was one of those like paradigm shifts where I was like, oh, I could use this thing like crazy. So I don't know.
So, can you explain? I mean, do you know how like what was it you're perceiving, and what were what are the controls? Because I've actually never used it.
Yeah, so the shuffler, right? It takes like the information and it shuffles it around, if that makes sense, right? So if you have a bass sound that is clashing, and what it was kind of like a pad sound that I had, and then my 808s were there, and it just was just meshing it around, right? The 808s are very like linear, right? There's not a lot of
Right.
movement. It's just hitting. Once I shuffled it and moved it around, and so now I'm getting this movement in the bass from the pads, and it sat with the 808s just like butter. And then you could solo the sides and spread it, and you could hear exactly what's happening to the sides. And when I did that, like the perceived loudness of it was like almost instant. I had to turn down the output because it like literally like sounded twice as loud afterwards.
Interesting. I can
And
play
I've
with it.
used
Yeah.
it several times, but it just didn't like I didn't pick up. My ears didn't pick up on what was happening. And then go ahead.
No. Oh, I was. I just reminded me. I wanted to. There's one other little cool SSL like plugin thing. Remind me not to forget, because I'll be old and I'll forget to, to say it.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying like, I didn't want to cut off because you're in your flow state about the shuffler. It just reminded me like, like say something about like the SSL, like the native channel strip, and even on like the 4K, and the not. I'm not sure if the Plugin Alliance has it, but the SSL channel strips have a
Yeah.
really interesting feature on them. Is that they not only have all the EQ, comp, expansion, gating, all that stuff, but they have a width
Have the
knob.
width, the Haas effect. Yeah.
Yeah, and they also have a pan on them. So this track that I'm working on, like getting in guitar files that are in stereo, and I was kind of like, well, I want to turn this part to one side, and realizing that the panning on the channel itself, like you can start to induce phase issues when you're turning a stereo track to one side, or you're leaving one all the way to one side and then maybe you bring in the other up to the middle. It just wasn't working that way for me. But leaving the stereo file in stereo and then turning the pan knob on the SSL plug itself allowed me to take that full spectrum signal. And I know that there's still some cancellation happening, but I was perceiving it as less because I'm leaving it on, it's the source is in stereo and then you're turning that the other way. I mean, I used to do, I would take that summed down thing to a mono output, pan that, versus trying to mix the correct, you'll still get cancellation, but it's not like taking both and putting them at center or evenly to one side or the other. It seems it allowed it to have a fuller range of what the original stereo track was, but allowed me to place that in the mix better. Because, if everything is stereo, then nothing is stereo, right? Yeah, so that's a neat little thing on there. And also, there's a width adjustment on those SSL plugs as well that you can sit there and take that stereo. You can kind of fold it in a little and then pan that where you want it. It's a really handy thing versus doing it just on the DAW.
Yeah,
you can use the SSL phase plugin for your phase issue, the cross phase. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for a discount actually now because you always get that 70% or something like a discount on certain plugins. And another thing is, I'm not sure if you heard about it from Acoustica Audio, the space control plugin from Hardwell and Luca Petrolesi. That's magic.
heard it.
Space control. So you can actually, you have the bands, you have 3 bands or 4 bands, I think you can have in total. You can mid-side stereo and whatever choose for each band. You can increase the stereo width of it, and you can see when you're increasing it. So if you want to bring more harmonics in it, because you're missing harmonics, it will bring more harmonics. It will spread it, and then you can see that's going out of phase. And then you have another knob where you can rotate that and it will bring it back in phase. So at the end, when you go out of your plugin, you're still in phase, but with stereo with it. The only down problem of that is I'm using it on Logic Pro, but since I moved to Pro Tools, they didn't update it to work on Pro Tools with M1 Apple chip. So it only
still with that thing, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have an M1 like I have, then in Pro Tools, you cannot use it. You can only use it in Logic Pro. If you don't have an M1, M2, M3, then you can use it also in Pro Tools.
Yeah, it's fun, even with there's a Radial, they make all like those awesome DIs and interface boxes, reamp boxes. They make an analog box called the Phaser, and you can sit there and have a source that comes in, and you can, rather than inverting the polarity, as the internet will like come in, is it phase or polarity? It's like, but you can sit there and rotate the polarity of it as we're not affecting it in a time domain. You can start putting it like +1, +2 to plus 180 or the minus to do these sort of micro shifts of polarity, and that's like something I put that little video out. Like, I love the Muro guys, the Ruben and those dudes. They're awesome, and like they're making great stuff. So I'll try to plug their mics whenever I can. But there had a little bit on there that had the inner kick, the 901, and a Beta 52, and they weren't that far from each other. But even looking in there, to where the transients were aligned, the initial bit of the waveforms were in phase, but then the waveforms got out of phase. And I was doing some things, then like sort of figuring out a way of doing those smaller shifts to allow those two signals. Again, one's picking up essentially a shorter sound, and one's picking up a longer sound, even though it's on the same source. That's why we're using like a kick in and a kick out. We're looking for a little bit of and a little bit of, and being able to slightly rotate the wave itself to allow not to affect the initial transient, which is where we lose the most amount of low end. But I wanted to be able to keep a little bit more low end as the signal would go on, and not have to go in and take all of the kick ins, phase align the transient, and then chop it so the tail didn't impact the kick out. It's like, it's just a lot of labor, but being able to go in there and just sort of like alter the shift a little, that just brought maybe a little the initial transient slightly less, but still in. And then the later bit of the wave was now closer to being in. And it was just like 10 degrees of a shift that it required, not like flipping phase or inverting polarity. Yeah. And it's just those little tools.
Yeah.
Night and day. Because somebody was asking something on there, and I think this is important that we're talking about this. That it's like, what is what's something to make it sound pro?
Yeah.
And the things that we're talking about right now, about ensuring, outside of, I love color coding. Like if you take me to an, I don't know if they have it in Germany, but like an office supply store, we go to Staples or we go to Office Max, I start looking around and I'm like, ooh, I could use those labelers and those color coded paper clips. And I don't know, I got like an office supply fetish or something like that. It's like if you can have your it's like somebody sends me a one of those 64 pack of multicolored Sharpies, I'll do you a free mix. Like, ooh, I love them. I didn't have this particular color of purple Sharpie. Anyway, it's these little things though of ensuring that all of the tracks, before we talk about what's your secret sauce, mojo, magic plug-in thing, that they are clean, they are distortion free, like as in unwanted distortion. They're free from errors of clicks and pops and things. And actually, in I don't know who was saying it, but there was something about, we're talking about like our initial, what's phase one of starting the mix. One of the things that you have to be aware of if somebody is sending you files is it might not have been recorded particularly well, or it might have been recorded well, but the recording levels changed on a track. They maybe switched guitar for a different part, whatever the case is. They're punching in later on. Maybe they just weren't digging in as hard. Let's just say the front end didn't change, but the performance changed, or the performance stayed the same and the front end was changed. So that's also a thing that you'll get that initial gain balance, but you can't guarantee that the performance on every individual track is where it's supposed to be relative to other spots on the track. Like the old comping was, all right, I've got background vocals on the chorus. I only have 24 tracks, and I'm going to use those background vocal tracks for tambourine on the verses. And it's recorded at a different level, but it's like I only can have so many channels. So you just sit there and like, balance all of that. That's another really important thing to ensure that if you do play it all the way through, if it says acoustic guitar, that acoustic guitar performance is essentially mixed within itself. The dynamics of the player for the let's say the verses versus the choruses versus the bridge are all where they're supposed to be. And you don't have to go in there and then not only clip gain it to make it listenable, but then, okay, well now I actually have to, it's totally fine except for one section, it's way loud. Then you have to like, highlight that, Command E, clip gain that bit down. Those are also things that are, will make the difference in how to make it sound pro. But like things free and clear of unwanted noise and distortion, that's again, like that's getting it 80% there. Then you have the faders up, and then you could sit there and say, okay, now I get to make musical choices. You know,
What just I just remembered is that I had the FabFilter Saturn plugin for saturation.
Mhm.
I think most of the people, or at least me, I always go through the presets when I'm applying it to something. And you have this perception that some presets sound good and some sound awful. And I wanted to understand why does the saturation, because there was not a huge difference between these presets, and some of them were just great and some of them were just awful. And I found a
Yeah.
tutorial over the internet, and a guy explained it because he was using it wrong for 2 years. And he said it's because a saturator, when you apply it, that's not a band saturator. It always takes the lowest, your how do you call it? The lowest frequency, your note,
fundamental.
your fundamental. Thank you. The fundamental. It takes the fundamental and it makes copies of the fundamental, right? That's a saturator. That's how a saturator works. But when FabFilter Saturn came in, he gave you the option to band saturate it. And when you set the bands, it usually nobody knows that if you send the band split to a certain point where the fundamental is not your keynote, it's not the key where the track is, that's where it sounds like crap, because it makes copies of not your fundamental, because you have in the low end your fundamental, and in the next band you have something that's not your fundamental.
Right.
It's
so
still
you're getting
but not the right
second
one.
or third order harmonics, which
exactly
will give you
and
it could be very cool, or it could say now everything, it's not out of tune, but it feels out of tune.
Yeah.
You start adding like, stuff that is not like cool colored, notes. It's like, now we've just bent the pitch.
Exactly. But that's an explanation why you would be always careful where you set that band split. You can always get creative, but it makes sense where you split it.
Always. Yeah. Speaking of plugs like that, the SSL, the X saturator.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've been using that a lot recently. It's like, throw it on a drum bus. I don't even, just like whatever the preset is, maybe just adjust the input or the output. And it does a thing.
Of saturator, I do recommend you, if you don't have it already, the Karzog or Karzog, it's called Ira.
Kazrog.
Kazrog.
Yeah, True Ira. Yeah, it's a good one. Very
amazing.
Good. Yeah, Black Box is my favorite. But yeah, Kazrog, they make a killer one. I will say this, because I'm pretty sure Christian used Pro Tools. I know Brian does. I just did this yesterday, and it was like, holy crap, it put me in my chair. And I didn't do it because it was adding color, but I put on heat. And if you don't, do you know what heat is? Are you aware of it?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So do you use it at all?
The plugin. No, I don't have it.
I remember like reading the history about it. It's very unfortunate because he like passed away right after he designed it. But it's basically, it's like an emulator of a console.
Yeah, it's an analog console, and the drive adds second or third order harmonics depending on what you want, and then the amount of drive going in, the amount of color. I do a lot of the live stuff, using like the Avid S6Ls, the live console, and that's one where like, man, I'll go on to every single channel on the desk and just engage heat at the default setting of like 50%, and all of a sudden it's like, again, it's one of those faders up things. You're like, huh.
It's alive.
Sounds like a mix already.
It's alive. Holy crap! Yeah. Yesterday,
totally.
and the tone box in it, just beautiful, and like, it's going to replace the saturators. And like the reason why I didn't use it, and this is something I think we all could end up being guilty of, is we'll find a technique that works and just stick with it. And then I also have certain rules in my brain that I live under, and sometimes you want to break those. Sure. But I'm thinking like, I'm already in a console. Why would I put on another console? So I'm like coloring the color now. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But I just tried it yesterday because someone brought it up in the live chat. They're like, you heard of heat. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'll just try it. See what happens. It put me in my chair. I was like, why haven't I been doing this since the get-go? Like just what you said. It was like, it's already done now.
If there is a magic button, like
that was it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it was a couple weeks ago we were talking about the thing of like, pre-digital, we never talked about saturation because
I'm testing it as we speak.
everything had saturation already, you know, and now we're going back, and it's a thing about like, you know, being in the box, out of the box, you know, in this conversation of validity of all this stuff. But it is you know, it's an interesting point of discussion. It's like going in the box, then we all, you know, I think collectively as an industry, first we're like, oh, this is so much more convenient. And then we started like longing for some sonic characteristic that no longer was there, that we exchanged, like, you know, it's like exchanging convenience for safety, you know, or something like that. Or, you know, it's like, well, you're going to lose something, you know, in that equation. But yeah, like heat, that's the thing. But you're right.
He designed it for that, just what you're saying, because it's like we're missing the harmonics, you know, the saturation, whatever you want to call it. And he knew that, and like, so Pro Tools commissioned him to put that in their system. And I don't know if you know this, Kristen, but put everything on pre-fader, you'll hear it better. And I tend to
it's like mixing after the tape.
Yeah, exactly. Like I put it on pre, and like
it's always pre-fader on for me.
Yeah. If you don't, like, usually you won't put it. You could put more into it. Like you just hear it better. I always put more in it when I put it on pre. So
you know, it's funny that, and I didn't mean to cut you off there. Internet, it's like a Zoom call, right? One of the things that is interesting about like doing the ear training and doing mix analysis, and you know, we always talk about some of these classic albums and like, oh my God, it sounds so good. Steely Dan Asia, Dark Side of the Moon, whatever it is. A lot of those, they weren't super laborious mixes. You know, you get guys today that like, man, it's like it takes you forever. And a lot of these mixes were done. The main mix was done in a day.
Yep.
Running through a console. And it wasn't just the fact that back in my day, you know, like there are equivalent skill sets of pros in the 1970s as there are in the 2020s. But getting it closer through the gear just made it easier. And also you were tracking things and you had to commit, you know, so for those of you with like commitment issues, you know, but yeah, it's like, yeah, you're getting the sound you want from the drums. You're getting the sound you want from the keys, the piano, the vocal. You're already tracking it maybe with a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression going into tape, which is doing the thing. It's going through the circuits on your old AMEC or MCI or API console. And by the time you're done with the tracking and you're just listening back, you're like, man, this thing sounds like a record. You know, and it doesn't take that long to mix it with all of that stuff that organically just got added into the sauce. And now, but that's also, you had to go to the studio. Studio time was expensive. You had tape. You had all those issues. Oh man, channel 4 is busted because we have a blown capacitor. So I got to pull that whole card out, or I got to repatch something. Like, all of that, you know, you don't have to deal with it now. But then you're like, well, yeah, it just sounds sort of, I mean, it's always been like the complaint of digital. It sounds digital. It sounds flat. It sounds sterile. It's like too clean, you know. And I think that was one of the, where SSL in a way came sort of maybe down in like what's cool, because everybody now, they, oh, I just want the Neve or like this super saturated front end sound. It was digital meeting clean SSL suddenly was like, oh, that's way too clean. And I think now we're sort of flipping back to the other side, right, and switching to those pure drive pre's. Like, stuff is sounding a little too analog, too fuzzy. You know, it's like it's adding too much color. And I need something now that's like, okay, let me track this clean so I just capture the characteristic of the instrument. And then you could fuzz it up a little bit later, you know?
You know, you literally just described why I got this console. Because I got sick of decoding the Da Vinci Code of harmonic within digital. Because that's what it is. It's very delicate, and like true iron, yeah, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. And then when it doesn't, it's like leaves you with this, okay, now what do I use? You know, and
today's a nickel day, you know, tomorrow's 100%. An iron day, you know, but steel, you know.
And then it's like, oh, it's close, but I'm still not there, you know. And so I actually, like, before I got the console, like, I would still go downtown Denver to my buddy's studio and use the DDA board, because to me personally, I hear the difference. I like the saturation and the color that these consoles offer. Like, to me, it's the difference. It's what I like. And I'm like, I just need to find something. HB called me one day and he was like, dude, Big Six. And like, that's where it came into play because I'm like, now I could get a board that's affordable, fit in my home studio, and give me the benefits of a big board.
Right, right.
And that eliminated me trying to figure out the whole,
You're still rubbing the Big Six in my face. I can't wait for mine to arrive. I already made place for it. I already know how I'm gonna connect it. It's not here already. So the Big Six
you're
is
laying
coming,
down
but
in the studio like it's gonna be right here.
exactly.
You have a little like cutout, like SSL goes here.
It has literally cut out in my studio the place where you're gonna be the Big Six. I still need to make a place for the UF8 that you have in your studio. Love that controller, but
super convenient. I mean, and
yeah.
it's nothing is perfect, but I mean, I tell you the UF8, UC1, the UF1, all of those, I use all the features, and I kind of felt like there's a lot of redundant features that are on those, because you can make any of the buttons do anything you want. I mean, they have some of the preset deals where you can say, cool, I can make layer 3 is transport, for the 8 hotkeys that are above each of the 8 faders or something like that.
But is the speed of use?
Yeah, for sure. And I like having the 8 and the 1 because I have the transport that's right there, and I don't have to sit there and like flip a layer. It's just,
exactly.
if you use those customizable buttons, it makes it even better. I'll do a little plug on here as we're talking about like the analog stuff. Like this record that mixed it last year, and it's still in that waterfall release it's a group called Ordinary Time. It's on Spotify if anybody wants to listen to it. That whole thing, I mixed it in Luna.
Oh wow!
And with all of the stuff, and it was one of the things I wanted to talk. You were talking about, is it nickel? Is it steel? Like going through that using the Studer on every channel, and it's the same tape. Like that's one thing there. Like I think maybe now you can change it, but it was like 15 IPS 456.
Got you.
And the API Vision channel strip across everything. I used the Neve summing on there, but if anybody goes and listens to that, available on all streaming platforms, that whole thing, the main EP is called You Are My Hiding Place, and that's all Luna with that analog emulation. But the key I found was, and I didn't initially start out this way. I started going through each channel saying, well, this channel really could stand to have, this plugin alliance thing. And this one could stand to have, the BX that. And then I was like, man, there's something that wasn't cohesive. And I scrapped it. And I went in, I strapped the same tape, the same channel strip across everything, going to the same sort of internal summing. And it was like, oh yeah, okay, this sounds like a record. You didn't have to sit there and futz with, well, am I going to use the steel or the iron? I want to use this tape speed on this tape speed on that. That would have been a production decision that you might have made. We're recording drums and bass at 15. We're doing guitars and vocals at 30, because we're trying to catch more, whatever. Or I'm going to it's a 2-inch machine, but we're going to put in a 16-track headstock on 2-inch versus a 24-track headstock, so we can get more like tape. Like those are all things you would do on the front end. But I was just finding, the band is called Ordinary Time. Nazcat said that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll put that in there. But yeah, that was all done in Luna. It had it's an analog master though that did go through like Better Maker, the Shadow Hills, a Buzz EQ was on there, and I forget what the transfer desk, but that even helped it even more to just sit like an analog recording done digitally. They recorded it out in this big old A-frame house out in the middle of the country. The group is a trio. They hired like a rhythm section to come in and they've just played live in a room. You know, the house out there in farmland, Virginia, kind of close to where Dan is, like had a grand piano in the house. So they just bring out a guy to come tune it every other day. They laid down tracks through a couple X8Ps, and then the producer sent it to me, and it's like trying to take this thing, and it ends up, I'm like, huh, yeah. But those choices and having, you know, this is a long ramble.
Well,
Yeah, but it's like not picking and choosing all the time. Like, get your tracks clean, get them distortion free, then just pick a channel strip and strap it across everything.
yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
for one cohesive flavor. Throw the heat on there. I mean, those are the things that whatever our ears have learned through pretty much anything that's pre-2000 was probably through a console.
Yep.
You know, and it just sort of has more of a unified characteristic on it. Like, I'll go in and, like, if I have 10 different background vocal parts, you know, oftentimes I might even just group them and then have one EQ for all of the backgrounds. Or if I find sort of an EQ that kind of works, man, I'm just pasting that across all of them because I want that similar flavor and similar characteristic, even if it's different singers. Like, I don't want to mess around with that. I just want it to sound like background vocals. And one of the things in that tone shaping is not having maybe all those colors, not having it so many different varieties of saturation and all that stuff. Here, I'm done. Sorry.
Like you're really putting up some important stuff, and like that Studer is a sleeper, by the way. I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, but that
I'm
Studer,
using it all on this next record, man. I'm like, it just strapped it across it. 15,
so good.
done.
When you know what I'm going to do now is like you're tickling my brain because now I'm going to do a mix where I'll do it with Heat or Studer,
Okay.
and this is something that maybe anybody you out there watching could take from me, but you want to mess around with stuff. Don't marry your like test. I say it all the time, and so I'll use Heat through Pro Tools and then a Studer, and why not? And see the difference, right? Yeah, Dave's like the Stu. And I'm going to do exactly what you just said. I'm going to just take it, same setting, across the board, dial it in there to give it that cohesive sound, because I think you're exactly right. That's what we're hearing oftentimes is all these different colors,
Yeah.
different.
It gets messy sometimes.
Very, very much gets disjointed, and it doesn't sound cohesive like what we're used to. And I think you're exactly right.
You know, there's something that, we've talked about before with, like, I get really suspicious when I see somebody with 19 EQs on a track, just to, highlight sometimes stuff that's like, you just look at it, you're like, well, that's odd, and then that's like, you're just trying to be nice about it.
Yep.
But it's like, I think aside from the fact that previously younger engineers that didn't have a bunch of experience, you didn't have all those tools. So you couldn't strap 19 EQs, but you're using the same EQs across the channel, and you're probably like, yeah, this is good enough. This is kind of doing it. And you didn't have to, figure out like, well, I need to use this EQ that it's inducing a color that, maybe is amplifying something to a degree that is too much from a previous saturation plugin that you put on. And then you're like, okay, well, I really like what it did on the high end, but now the low mids are really kind of too thick. And then I can't EQ it out because it's just sort of turning it down, but it's not getting rid of it. So then you add another thing that's like, okay, now that pulled out that low mid problem, but it trashed my highs. It's like,
Exactly.
again, where using something similar in its nature and characteristic, I think probably will go a long way towards getting closer to sounding pro with less work. And again, you're not like, somebody said way earlier, like trial and error, and I would respectfully disagree. That's just guessing.
Totally.
For me, I have the tape machine, like what I showed you, like when you were explaining. I have a real tape machine, but it's not a Strutter. But it does the trick on my kicks and on my synths, so that's why I'm using it. I'm not using it for glue on a mix box because it brings that noise floor up, and I cannot get rid of it. I tried all the pedals, all the silencers. I cannot get rid of that noise floor. So that's there to stay.
Then you try to RX it, and it takes all of the the vibe
Exa-
that you were getting out of it.
Yep.
it takes
No.
the thing what I'm trying to get into it. So I'm back there. So it's good for synths. It's good for the kick. Sometimes on the drums, depends on the
Yeah.
type of track that you're doing. So it's great to have
I
it
will.
in here in the studio.
I will say two things that are good with those sort of tape emulators, especially the Studer, and I'd have to check in on heat, and I think it has an analog setting. But man, there was on that Ordinary Time record, it was this thing, and I was like, and I'd sent one of the mixes off, and to master. Unfortunately, the mastering engineer is a friend of mine, so it's like even at a professional level, you still make mistakes. And I'm just listening to it coming back, and it had a really sparse acoustic intro, and I'm hearing the hiss, and I'm like, dude, what did I send? Like, what did I do here? Like, I'm gonna get fired on this project. You know, it's on a label, and I'm like, oh god, dude. And then I'm going back through, and then there was one of the tape things that noise was engaged on. And as soon as I found it, I was like, turn that off. And I turned it off, and then I played it through. And after the intro, the intro was clean, but after it came in, it didn't feel the same. So going in and I automated the noise on and off. You know, so that might be a thing for like your
So it
synths
stays
and
away.
with the noise floor. Like, print all that stuff, print two leveled versions of it, one tape, one without tape. You know, if you need it to where it's super clean, you don't have that noise floor on there. And I mean, this is
That's a good point. Yeah,
in the analog
that's
domain.
a good point. Yeah,
You could do that, and then like once it all kicks in,
Haven't
and you're
tried
not
it.
going to hear the little
Yep.
bit of fuzz. Like, it'll probably make it sound fatter. And then I was like, oh yeah, let me automate that stuff. And I think I'm
That's a
pretty
great
sure
idea.
you can automate that on Heat as well, and for any of those other ones, like the Waves has that analog on. I mean, you do like any of those, the CLA 76. There's the analog button. You can, I think that's one of the things if you look in the automation controls, or you just simply print one with and one without.
That's a great
You know.
idea. And I haven't tried it. Thank you for the.
Yeah, but
Never tried
it was
Never
just one of
crossed my
those
mind.
things. Yeah, when you start hearing, like, one of the things, the sensibilities of listening in modern music though is like, a lot of times hiss isn't cool.
Yep.
You know, it's like cool when it's like in there and it's just adding a little thing. But
Not when it's clean. Not when you have.
yeah, I tell you though,
clean signal.
there's a Nashville artist. I've no affiliation with her, but her name is Harper O'Neill. For those that are familiar with her, I think she's now going to be out there opening for Lainey Wilson. But she has this record called Dark Bar Daisy, and I found her like through TikTok a couple years ago, and I'm like, and it just had like this real soul. It's country, but it's like soulful, like Muscle Shoals, Memphis kind of thing added on with some horns. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna follow her, and it's like really cool. And then the album came out, and as soon as I hit play, you hear this, and I was like, but then the song came on, I'm like, that hiss sound, I don't know if it is, I would hope that, you know, it's so vibey of a record. I hope that it was actually recorded analog, but if not, that hiss was great. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is totally, it's
It does.
perfect.
It depends on the track.
Yeah, for sure. Not when it's a solo grand piano acoustic opening, where you're like,
Ballad.
yeah. And then if anything is compressed, then it just brings that up. That's for sure.
Totally.
That's a problem. Yeah.
Did
I was
we
gonna
use-
say-
I do love.
yes.
I do love
Ghost
the
Notes,
plugins
of
from
course.
Sound Tower
Yeah.
because you can use them on Prophet and on Oberheim,
Yeah,
and you can automate your analog piece of gear. And I think
yeah,
that's wow,
Mm.
brilliant.
yeah.
Love that
Good.
stuff. So you can automate basically your analog gear. in a
And it's
track.
funny, we have all these little tools that we're trying to use these days to make it sound basically like a record. You know?
Like the old records.
Yeah. Well,
man.
but it's just a thing, man. It's like, I think there's just so much material. It's the same like we have 2 ears. You know, our collective knowledge of sound, it's a lot. You know, that when and then in a very short period of time, we've radically departed from the way that we made things musically for people to listen to. And then where everyone's like instantly like, okay, this is really cool and convenient, but something's different, something's slightly off. And now we're like, hopefully, and that's why, like, I like the hybrid workflow kind of thing. It's, you get all of the benefits. I don't have to deal with tape stretch, or degradation. You play it 10 times through because people can't decide what they want to do on a mix. Then all of a sudden, like, it just doesn't sound the same. Like, you got to nail it up front.
Circuits going bad, tubes going
for sure.
bad. Yeah, it eliminates a lot of the headaches.
So your 1176 sounds different when you turn it on than when it's been cooking for about 8 hours.
Totally, 100%. Yeah, all of that.
It gets softer as the day goes longer.
It
has also some things too, like you come back, you like, all right, I mean, my ears are trashed for today. I'm going to come back and listen tomorrow. You fire everything back up in analog, even playing through from a DAW. So you know that it's no tape issue, but you come back through and it's like, it sounds different. Is it my ears? Is it the atmospheric pressure or temperature of the air in the room? And it's like, nah, man, that gear just ain't hot yet.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, you got to let it warm up. It's there's pros and cons to everything, and that's what I love about hybrid, is because we could eliminate the headache that we deal with, just everything we're detailing out in analog. However, still want the analog saturation harmonics, and like, so you could bring best of both worlds. I did want to go back to something, because I think that this is really important for anybody out there that is like learning how to mix. And Brian brought something up about, you look at certain sessions, just stacked plugins. And most of the time I question that. I'm like, okay, either you're not hearing what's coming out of your monitors correctly, or it's a bad recording. There's something wrong here, right? And if you are that person that's dealing with that, and say you're like, just something's off, start bypassing plugins. Don't add. Bypass. It's usually one of these plugins that is like ruining your sound. And I've found that often, and I see people usually do the opposite. They're adding stuff. Like you said, I put on a saturator. It sounds almost right, but the low end is off. And then they grab an EQ. Now it sounds thin. Now let's grab another compressor or whatever it is. It's like, it might have been the saturator. Saturator did it. And instead of bypassing that or eliminating that, we're trying to stack more plugins on it. And so I do this a lot. It's even when it sounds good, I'll bypass stuff. I get done mixing something. Now I want to bypass. Listen to a bypass. Does it sound better? Now,
sometimes you're like, oh yeah, it sounds a little punchier. All the punch you're trying to get.
It happens to me almost every mix. Like, I'll make a move and I'm like, that move is not benefiting this track, And also, what usually gets put into this sort of mindset is the fact that, like, we'll develop habits. And so you may have a habit of EQing your kick a certain way, right? Or compressing a certain way. It may not work for that record that you're working on. And so it's great to go and bypass and make sure you're not tricking your mind. I mean, how many times have you used a plugin and you're adjusting a knob and it's in bypass?
Totally.
You're like, oh crap.
It happens to everybody. And then you're like, I was doing it yesterday, and I'm like, and I'm turning, and I'm like, I'm not hearing it. Fortunately, I've done it enough times that my first thing is like, is it on? I'm like, oh yeah.
Yep, that's it. Because we mix with our eyes, by the way. Like, when you see something,
try not to, but you do.
Yeah, when you see something moving, it's like a trickery. I don't know what the actual term would be, but your eyes are tricking your brain into thinking that there's actually changes being made. And this is a real thing. And so that's like the whole thing about it, is bypass your plugins, listen to it with no plugins on, and doing that just so you are establishing, like, this is actually like sounding better. And that's just the ultimate goal.
Yeah, it's funny.
I think.
Oh, go ahead, please.
You go.
Oh, I've said it before, like doing some, mixes for video, and like live performance shots of things. And it's why I found that, like, mixing with the video it does this exact same thing. Like, I would find that I would come up with, the mix for the song or the entire concert or something, and I'm listening to it and it all sounds good. It sounds like it would be, you would have it for a record, and it should stand on its own. But then when I see it, like, sometimes there would be things that, now that I see the guy back there with the triangle, or the shot of the singer isn't here, it's here. And then it's sort of like, now the visual isn't matching what I'm hearing. and your eyes for sure, have a huge impact of how you're perceiving the sound. I mean, it's not like, visual and or eyes and ears and all the senses, like they're all connected in the brain. You shut one of them
But
off and it's like it's going to alter the perception. If you couldn't feel like,
something is strange. So let's give an example, right? So
hmm?
you have an EQ as a plugin, and then you have the Big Six, also an EQ, right? You have the bells, let's say. Somehow, if I mix in the plugin, I don't listen. But if I mix on the hardware, I'm not mixing with my eyes, I'm mixing with my ear.
Yeah.
You're doing the knob thing on both things, but somehow if you're doing with the mouse, you're more doing with your eyes, and if you're doing with your hand, you're doing more with your ears. And I cannot explain why. I always trying to put that aside, but it's always the same.
I don't know why, but dude, that's 100%. That's like, that's even why getting like the UC1. I feel like this is a big SSL commercial today, but that tactile response, oftentimes, I'm just like nudging it, but I'm grabbing. It's like there's a conscious effort to grab something, to turn it, because you're making, you already knew you wanted to do something. I guess even before grabbing it, your brain says, I need to make a change. And then you're actively engaged in that process. And I find that the EQ moves oftentimes are either very, very much less, or I might like crank something and be like, yeah, that feels good. Just turn the knob all the way up, to where maybe if I was mousing it, I would often like, ooh, I'm not going to turn it all the way up. That seems like my instinct would say that's too much. But whether it's an emulation, but if it's even a real plugin, then, or not a real plugin, like a real piece of hardware. Yeah, man. Like you like you got like like I've got these the API, like the 560s. Man, sometimes on some things, like I'll just take that 16K band and go and just slam it all the way, pull something down in the mix, and it just goes.
That's it.
At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's a real piece of analog or if it's a controller, like a DAW controller like you have.
Right.
It's a thing of putting your hands and not moving the mouse on it.
Right.
I think Damuzi just asked the question. Damuzi asked a question right now. Is there a formula for mixing that can be applied to any musical genre? Personally, I would say there is no standard one. The only standard formula is to identify which are the pillars of that particular genre and mix to them. Like, for example, in house, it's bass, kick, vocal, and snare. Those are the main 4 pillars. You mix those 4 in the first place, you put the kick as an anchor, and you mix everything regarding to those 4 pillars. And I think every genre has pillars like that. I didn't mix anything else besides house until now, but I assume every genre has one, so you mix to that. That would be my take on it.
I got 2 little mindset tricks I could try to offer here. Brian actually detailed one. The best practice is to take whatever you're using and crank it, and then pull it down. Find that sweet spot. And if you have to, crank and then go all the way back down. Crank, go back all the way down, and then it's really easy to find the sweet spot this way. And then another thing I like to do is, for example, if I'm working on, we'll say guitar or even bass, I know what my vocal point is. So say if we got vocals, we have a lead vocal. That's what I'm really trying to carve room for. So I'm working on the EQ of the bass, but I'm listening to what's happening to the vocal. And I do this often. So I'm trying to understand the relationship of everything. Instead of, there's times where if I'm focused just on the low end, I find myself doing a lot more. Where if I'm creating a relationship between the whole track, and I know that I'm working on the bass, but I'm not focused on what's going on with the bass. I'm understanding what's going on with the vocals. The low end of the vocals just opened up. There's a sweet spot for the bass.
Right.
And so I do that a lot. It's really diving into your mind and understanding what is going on. And I think the best practice is to crank. You take the high end of a Pultec put it at 12K, boost it all the way to the top, get it annoying, and then crank it down, and your brain and ears will start to understand what is happening to the signal.
Yeah.
And that's where you find
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I would definitely, we don't need to get greasy to come on and try to roast from a distance. Yeah. No, but it's that what we're talking about is not about sweeping to find annoying frequencies. We're talking about to be able to hear what exactly that particular plugin or piece of analog hardware, what it's actually doing. Because it might not just be turning up, with a shelf at 10K. It's doing something, it's adding harmonics. It's also probably inducing some form of phase shift somewhere else along the line. So if you're unsure, especially when you're just learning and you can, and then this is where you can sort of trial and error, but your trial and error or you're experimenting with an actual experiment. Like, I want to hear what this thing does. I don't know what it does, but now I'm going to turn the knob and see what it does. Like, it's not just, I wonder what happens when you turn this knob. Like, you're actively searching for an answer to a question that you've asked, So I think those are always like, yeah, sometimes you'll turn and you'll hear something that, especially on analog gear, you're like, if I really do crank this thing, it adds a certain something else,
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, you know what? That's pretty cool. I could use it. You just file that away. And it's like, it might not be right for this song, but at least you're familiar with your gear or your plugins or whatever the case may be. Like, what it does. Then you understand what a claw hammer does, what it's for, what its main purposes are, how it feels when you use it, when not to use it,
Ultimately, I think these practices establish your ears to make the decision rather than your eyes. I mean, that should be without saying, but we're all very, very well aware of the new digital age and mixing with the eyes. I get it a lot. Like, people will come into my live and they'll be, your waves are clipping right there. And I just always want to reply with, yeah, but how does it sound? How does it sound? Like, your eyes told you that, and that's something we all have to really understand, is that get your eyes out of the equation. Now, you could look at analyzers and meters and this and that, and don't get me wrong, those are useful. But the ultimate goal is, does it sound good? That's it. That's literally it. That's the only question you ask your brain. If it's yes, so be it. Leave it. If not, then we got to keep working on it. And that's what it is. It's just getting to a point where we're not making decisions with our eyes, that the ears are the determining factor.
I had a student a number of years ago, and this is somebody I was giving like private mix lessons for, and they did the thing with the multiple plugins on there. And we had already talked about, like, phase shift and that type of thing. And that's why people do like that Pultec kick drum EQ thing, boosting and cutting, and it actually creates a lobe. It's because you've got phase shift that's going on. But it came with a track and it had like 4 EQs or something like that. We just shifted everything down one, and we put, pink noise signal generator on the top, and then it might have been like a fab filter or something in bypass, but you can use the RTA on the bottom, and then like bypassing every one of the plugins, and then going in and then bypassing the EQ moves that were done per plugin, and then you just turn the thing on, and then you're looking at the RTA and the changes that are happening, and then putting on 2 of them, looking at each one individually, then you start stacking them in order, and then all of a sudden you see this relatively flat, RTA line start to go, like, doing all kinds of kooky things. I'm like, that's why you're grabbing a million plugins. Because you're fixing one problem and you're causing another, because you don't know what that piece of gear actually does.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is very, very true. I know that in the beginning, it's like I think ear training and getting your ears to understand what's happening is like the longest learning curve of our profession. So understanding what an attack and release does on a compressor, like, the brain will understand that pretty quickly. What a threshold does, what ratios do, and how they react to the signal. But is your ears really understanding it? And that's kind of what I was telling you with the imager, and even monitors. Got to spend some time with them sometimes.
Yeah.
And then eventually it's like this paradigm shift. It clicks, and you're like, that's what it's doing, And so practice, education and understanding the foundation of what everything's doing is first and foremost. But and then like spending a lot of time with each plugin, with your monitors, with your headphones, whatever you're using to get to your mixes, understanding what those do, and then learning to trust them. That's like a big part to this. And I feel like I'm a late, but
do you guys? Sorry to jump in there.
Sure.
I just want to ask one question. Do you mix with headphones on? Finish your sentence. Sorry, I just want to get the question out of the way.
Yeah, I'm done. There's no problem. Go ahead, Brian.
It's a question for you and from Brian.
Yeah. So I do, and I was just thinking about this as you were talking about like speakers and that. Like, what I don't do is switch back and forth between the two. I will go through, and if I'm mixing on headphones, I'm doing it for a particular reason. I often use that sort of in my clinical, aside when I'm really trying to listen, like weird noises, blips, mouth noises, distortions. That later on I'll mix in headphones for the translation. But if I'm mixing in phones, I stay on phones, and I let my ears become accustomed to the phones. And then okay, now I'm gonna it feels pretty balanced. Then I'll go on monitors, and I'll stay on the monitors. I don't really have a work session where I'm going back and forth. It's like I think that you can make false choices doing that, because again, you just have to. I have to know my headphones, and you have to know your speakers. And even when you're going from like your new, if you're going from the mix cubes to the Atoms to the Calis to whatever you have, like you need a little bit of a time to adjust to whatever you're listening to. So yes, I mix with headphones from time to time, but like in larger chunks, before I'll switch over to something else.
And this is what's great about this, is because I actually do the opposite. I do switch around in my monitors, and I do a lot of mixing in headphones, as both of you know. I started mixing on TikTok probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it's been, and I fell in love with my headphones. But I had an engineer that I used to work with, a producer. We've done a lot of producing for TV and whatnot back in the day, and he put me onto the Sennheiser HD 650s, and he was a very detailed engineer, but he would describe them in frequency range. And he says that these are like the Sennheiser are dead accurate from 5K and under. And then the Audio Technica were dead accurate from like 2K and up. And so that's how I've learned to trust those headphones right there, and so I dial in my low end with that, and I spend most of my time in those headphones. And then when it comes to polishing off my high end, I'll go into my Audio Technicas. And that's when I'm on live. But if I'm going to mix for clients, I mainly stick in my Atoms. I trust them. I love the ribbon tweeters, and then my mix cubes are a big part to my process. But mostly the mix cubes are for listening after I'm done with the mix and leveling. What I like about the mix cubes is I do most of the leveling. So that's just listening. I'll listen to the, what I got at first, and then go through and level. I put it in mono. And it just gives me a really good perception of the mid-range and just the mono aspect of the mix. But I don't know, lately, I would say I'm probably 60, 70% headphones at this point. Been mixing a lot in headphones.
I don't think you can avoid mixing in headphones, at least if you're talking about anything that's going to be consumed, in 2024.
I agree.
I tell you, one thing I haven't done in a long time is actually the car check.
Me too, bud. Me too.
It's like when you go out and you just get in the car and then you cry.
I know, it's never good.
it was so great, and now it's just
Yeah, I didn't even hear we did that album. We released that album, and I didn't even hear it till a month later in the car.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Is it good? Yeah, it's like you're like, well,
Yeah,
good thing
I was,
I'm using
like
I was sweating a little bit, but yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
you're like
I barely do it anymore. Mhm.
I'm using the SonarWorks uh, stuff
yep.
on my speakers and my phones. I'm actually mixing on Odie's
Hmm.
LCDX stuff.
Mm,
I really love them. I think they are the best phones I ever had. Previous to this, I was mixing on Neumann NDH30, and the same as you do, Brian. I usually do 80% of the mix, sometimes 90% of the mix on headphones, and only at the final stage I'm doing going back to monitors. But the last mix I did for someone, I actually switched earlier, like Rob did. So I did 60% and then the last 40% on speakers. And I found out that it fits my flow better because I tend to take some decision poorly on if I go until 90% on headphones.
Right.
So I'm starting a little bit early in the process to involve the speakers. And Rob, you said something about Cube. I use the Yamaha NS10s for that.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are great.
Sounds like crap, if you ask me. Sounds like, oh
Oh,
shit.
That's the
yeah.
best thing about it because it's super difficult to get a mix to
Yeah,
sound. That's the best.
to make
Like
it
the name.
sound good.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
difficult.
I tell you, man, there's some people though that we've talked about this sometime before. And was it Andrew Chapman had something? He was like had some post a long time ago about like what are the hot takes, and I was like, I don't really like NS10s. I used to we had a set at the studio I was in, and I found that if you didn't come up on them and then you decided to get them, a lot of people, I don't know if maybe it's faddish in a sense, because they're not particularly, in my opinion, good tools to use. And then you'll chase like the thing of, oh well, I can make a mix sound good on NS10s. It's going to be good anywhere. I don't know if that always works that way.
Mm.
Because again, you're trying, like, it can, but I think then people try to chase that goal of, rather than, I just want to clearly hear things to be reasonably accurate and create a good mix. Then it's like, it's almost like some kind of, video game challenge. We're like, all right, I get XP points. Like you get the NS10 500 XP points because you made a mix that translated on them, and you're like, yes, achievement unlocked. And it's like, I don't know if that's always a good thing, rather than finding something that's reasonably accurate and like using the sonar works. I mean, like took the dive this year and got the Trenov, which really has been helpful in my space.
Mm.
And then just create good from that, But yeah, like getting something that's like, all right, I got this one, and there's the driver, the phase is flipped, and the other one has a blown tweeter. But if I can make it sound good on that, then I know it's like, well, no, probably not. You're going to be doing crazy stuff to make it sound good. So
Yeah, and like NS10s in the mix cubes too. They're great at like dialing in the mid range and like mono part. Like you're gonna have a very tricky time getting the low end right, and then the perception of the low end in them are kind of wonky, if you ask me. Not accurate. Might be the better term for it. And even the high end, that it gets a little tricky in those parts. That's the thing is like once you get a monitor system that works for you, you start to understand like this is where this is where it serves its purpose in my system. And that's one thing I've done. And I got someone in the comments asking, a lot of people ask me this, why I have so many monitors. First and foremost, I was going to do Atmos, and I got sponsored by Cali. So they send me monitors. That's why I have so many. But yeah, I love my Calis too. They're great. Like, I mean, all of these are, but the fact of the matter is, like, I think what it really boils down to is just understanding your monitors, your system. And once you get that established and you could create not accurate mixes, but consistent mixes, if you will, you're off to the races. You're good to go.
One question I still have when it comes down to speakers and monitors, how do you balance your sub, your cross point to your tops? So you have a sub. Actually, ideal to have two subs, but let's go go with one. So you have the one sub and you have two tops, right? Where do you do the crossover? At 85, at 120, at 50, or do you listen and you move it where you can hear it at ear level? That's no difference between up and down. That's one piece.
Well, I don't have any subs,
Me neither.
so I've eliminated that. Previously, and other facilities had subs, and I think that the first thing, regardless of what that is understanding how your room, the physical space, responds. I mean, sometimes you know it's a cubic foot or cubic meter calculation of how that room is going to react. Sometimes a lot of us we're mixing in additional rooms in our houses these days, and like Sunny said, sometimes a sub can ruin a small room. But I definitely, I would find wherever it feels like that natural crossover point is. I think using something like Room EQ Works or some other RTA as well, being able to sit there and when you're running tone through your mains, no sub, and seeing where it starts to fall off, and then start dialing the sub in to where it's probably just adding that last octave of listening to where it's at least close to the level, and it's probably going to be the loudest thing anyway. I mean, you don't want to listen flat. I mean, generally, let's see which way people are watching.
Yeah.
Like the high end is kind of curving down. I don't want my my 10K to be the same output as 100, because that's going to be pretty harsh and shrill. The Fletcher Munson curve, for the ears and how it's going to respond and all that. Outside of all that nerdery, something I've done though to where you have variable crossover points. I think also using a signal generator going to your mains, and if you have some type of RT type mic or an RTA app on your phone, just be watching that externals, or you have Smart or something. You start running, start at 20, and you're probably just going to fart out your regular mains. And then you maybe get 40, 50, and you start hearing it. And if it's going out at the same output level, and then all of a sudden, it gets to 80, 90, and it feels like it drops out, that's not the speaker, that's your room. And then as you start pushing, more and more and more, and then you feel like it goes, you start finding then these different modes in the room to where okay, now I've got a build up at 300 and a dip at 100. And that's just because of how the physical space is reacting. So then, most of the dips are lower. So then if you could find the sub that can help to fill that in, possibly, but without it, sometimes if the room is just sucking out 60, no sub is going to fill that in. It's just going to suck out more 60 and then add other problems,
The way I thought about the process was to think about, where is my sub going from? So, okay, my sub is going from till 100 something, right? And my tops, my focal shape is 65, are going from 40 to 35,000. Okay, so I thought, okay, where's the overlap? Where do I have the minimum overlap? Because the tops is high pass filter and low end is low pass filter, right? So somewhere there is there's a curve going down for the one and another curve for one. So you have somewhere here at the bottom, like a triangle, where you have an overlap. So mathematical speaking, I could do the crossover around between 50 and 70 hertz. So that should be the best point of crossover between my sub and my focals. But when you start to listen about it and not think about mathematicals, it's a total different point. It has nothing to do with that mathematical anymore. So that's why I did that correlation on a year level, where I don't feel the difference between the tops and the downs. I don't feel like the bottom is coming from the bottom. So it's all natural. and only after that I'm applying the reference, the sonar works.
Yeah,
That's how I did
and
it for me. But
and that
I was, eager to see if you have different methods of doing it. So like, not
yeah, I
tips and
mean
tricks.
yeah, the any method that I've ever had has just been like what I've learned from people that have come in as like professional acousticians, room tuners, into other studios, and sort of like pick up on what they've done. I mean, I was able to sit there with Bob Hodis and hear him talk about like doing different stuff in rooms, and that was just he's done so like did Westlake and all. Like, he's an old school guy, and he'll come in and he likes the Clark technique, like 5-band parametrics, like that's what he'll recommend, and he'll just come into a room and he'll charge you 10 grand, but your room's going to be as best as it possibly can be, and so any of these guys will come in and they'll say, yeah, listen, you know, you're not in a square, but you're not in an ideal space. You can do the room mode calculations. You can find where those natural nodes are going to be. Look online for room mode calculator, put in your dimensions, and then sit there and start running tone in your room. And if it says that you have a 10 dB dip mathematically at 100, you're probably going to hear something close to that. I mean, those calculations are fairly accurate. Then you start saying, well, is it, a lot of, like, I know Rob and me, like, I've got drywall, that has some insulation, but then you've got resonant cavities, you got resonant cavities above you. I'm sitting on a concrete slab. I've got carpet. I don't have hardwood. I mean, all these things like start to impact the variables, but most likely the volume issue, not level of volume, but the space volume is gonna sit there, and that'll tell you like where those lobes and nodes are gonna naturally be. Sorry, Young, take a note on that. Does it work for me? Sorry, what is it? What's the question? Did you guys see a question from Mr. Moon?
But I think what he's referring to is just how you're describing how to test your room.
Oh, uh, so easy way to test it. You can use your phone, and there's plenty of RTA applications called a real-time analyzer. You're probably used to seeing that on like Fab Filters and other things that show you the actual frequency response of whatever sound it's listening to. So stick the RTA, your phone, and again, it's not your ears, but it's like using people will call it a measurement microphone, and stick that in front, maybe in the space where you generally listen, and then start running a signal generator. Most every DAW has a signal generator application on it, and that put it on pink noise at first, and get the volume up to 75 dB, C weighted, and then you'll start to see like how your room is reacting, and you'll see things that might be like, oh yeah, I see a really big bump in low end, or it's really has a lot of high end. Well, that pink noise coming across should be variable yet even sound across the audio spectrum, so that RTA device will show you what's actually happening in the room instead of what's happening like on the track. So it's like everything coming out of the speakers, and then that's how you're hearing it. So if you see either big peaks or dips on the RTA as it's measuring the room, that might tell you something and say, yeah, my room is really boomy. And then you can start finding ways to acoustically treat that. Like, let me pop this out. I mean, my space is like 12 by 15. It's not small, but back here, that's floor to ceiling, fully, full bass traps, 2 foot by, I think it goes to almost 2 foot in the back. Like, that corner's trapped. That corner's trapped. Also, I used to have the window, and I really like the window, but there was weird reflection, so that's 4 inches 2 foot by 4 foot stuff going across that window space by 4 inches deep. That's helping to soak up some low end, because I had the same deal. It was a little too boomy to where you're sitting there thinking, oh, I've got enough bass. And then you do the car check or something, and then it's just bass light. Usually when I hear somebody's mix, if it's bass light, that means their room is bass heavy. If it's bass heavy, it means their room is bass light. It's usually the low end. That's the biggest problem. Like this stuff here is handling, that's on one side, this is on the other. They're not exactly parallel, like where you can see like the sort of this, where is it at? The gap between. On the other side, the panel is slightly offset, so there's no two walls that are bouncing back and forth. That helps to eliminate flutter and echoes. You know, that's the basic thing. But yeah, that's Alan. No, they're ATC panels, 2x2, 2 foot by 4 foot by 2 inch fiberglass with a little bit of a gap behind it. Anyway, that's the process of determining like what your room is doing. And then the other thing on the signal generator, instead of using pink noise, you can actually go in there and dial in tones. And then maybe if your speakers say that they go from 30 to 24K, we'll start that thing out at 30 hertz. And you might not actually hear 30 hertz. And that might be the room, or it might be your speakers. Well, the spec says 30, but it's really 40. And as you start to turn it up, then you start to hear, okay, yeah, it's actually about 40. So I know that I can trust it down to 40. And you keep moving the signal up. You're going double the number. That's another octave. You go 40 up to 80. And if that feels like it's pretty smooth, that's even 80 to 160. And if you start feeling like it's getting louder or quieter, that means that your room then is doing something that is interfering with the even translation of the frequency. So, man, if you, the kind of danger zones, if you get a dip at like somewhere between 80 and 100, if you get a dip in the 300 range, or you start getting boosts 5K and above, those are real critical areas where we're always trying to figure out that 80 to 100, where it's not the low booty, but it's the fundamental bass notes. And then the 300s, that's all the mid. That's like middle of the piano, first and second position guitar stuff. A lot of melody happens there, and it's like, if you're getting a dip there, you might be turning those things up because your ears are tricking you. And it has nothing to do with the mix. It has to do with those frequencies aren't responding in the room. Hopefully that it's like, we need to call it analog. Like, I love watching that dude's stuff, but he also terrifies me. Like, he's going to come in and like shred you with math. And I'm like, I thought I was explaining it right, dude. I'm sorry.
And a lot of people are mentioning Sonar Works in here. And so I'll just give you my opinion on it. I do have it. Actually know quite a few people that have had it that I very, very much trust their work, and they're killer mixers. All of us have said the same thing, that it's just something wonky about it. It's not really accurate. I've done it 3 times in this room and got 3 different measurements.
Yeah.
So that and then Mike told me the same thing. Disher told me the same thing. I believe Will had the same problem. Yeah. HB had the same problem. So it goes on and on and on. So I'm concerned with Sonar Works being accurate. I ended up just not like, I don't use it at all anymore. It was a waste of money for me, unfortunately. Trenoff might be your better option.
Yeah, the Sonar Works. I had it as well, and I like what they do for the headphone stuff, because the headphones always have a curve, and I think that's cool. I think, but the stuff when it does for speakers, it's such a variable about how they take those multiple measurements. And it's like we should all understand our microphones. Well, we're using a measurement microphone that has it's omnidirectional, yet it has an on and off axis response. So you have to move that microphone so it sort of gets in the circle visually, and it's like a weird video game you have to play. But it is without any data, I will 100% stake, my reputation on it that a slight angle shift in how you're handling the mic will cause variance on how it measures. Like, I'll go out for a big PA thing and somebody's using smart, where you're using like an Earthworks, the E50, like $2,000, like 1 hertz, 1 cycle to 50,000, like flat reference mic. That thing is sitting on a stand. It is not moving one bit. It is taking a direction, and then you'll move it to another space for a different time domain calculation, and it'll take a measurement there, or you'll have 2 of them from different angles, and it's showing you plotting a frequency curve. When you have to do this, like even handling vibration, I think conceptually it's great. You're adding in a level of human error.
Yep.
Or not even error, just you're adding in a variable of how I'm holding it. That's a thing. And like if say like a singer on a handheld mic, like when they do this, like Christina does, you'll hear like the little the thumping on the mic. So like Will Bowser and we both switched to the Trinovs this year. Not cheap. It's like, I got a couple good records that got good checks, and then I instantly spent that check on, a piece of gear. However, the Trinov is a much more high detailed piece of gear. It's its own DSP processor that is not running as a plugin. And also the Trinov, like there's other issues that you'll have, like putting it on, if you're not using it necessarily, if you're using it on your system, well, there's all the inherent latency issues that it adds, phase issues that it adds. If you're using it as a plugin, like you really need to have another output from your mix bus going solely to another bus with only the Sound ID plugin on it, because otherwise your Sound ID plugin, even if it's the last plugin, people will they'll bounce a track down and Sound ID is on it. Well, you just printed that room EQ curve onto your track, so I think there's things that it
happened twice.
Inherently challenging to work with. You literally have to have when I used it, you have to have a listen bus. That is, all of my mix goes to essentially to a print track, and that is the only output from that thing going to my listen bus, which then routed to my speakers. And on the listen bus is where I put that Sound ID plugin. So I know that I'm hearing everything through it, but the Sound ID truly is the last thing. And I'll print, or I would do a bounce if I'm bouncing, if it's not doing real time. I'm bouncing the mix bus, which is right before the listen bus. So, but here's the difference in like the Trinoff, just this guy. Let me open up the screen. I'll show you what mine looks like.
But let's be honest. What's the difference between the Trinoff and the Sonarworks in terms of price? You're also talking about the different price category.
You are talking about a
3,000 something. Am I close?
You got muted.
This one. Yeah. You good now?
Yeah, you're back.
You've got audio? Okay, copy. Copy. Roger that.
Roger that.
This is kind of like the interface that's on here, right? And I've got it kind of set right now as, it's taking the main left right out of my Aurora, and that's what its input is. So it's got analog input. It's going to my focals. And what I have here, though, and it'll show you in the graphs, like this was my before in the room, okay? Like,
so
again, I don't have subs in here.
Or the red?
So the red is the left, and the blue is the right, and it has a 3-dimensional mic. So Look at that big old dip, right?
Mm.
Like I don't, and again, these are the Focal Trio, so that's about on point to how the low end should look. But I'm not putting anything out down there. What that is probably rumble in the room. That is the room. That's just the dip that organically there. And then, there's a little bit of a dip here. Not an area like 800 where I'm going to be boosted. But, and again, looking at this is a 5 dB difference on this top line. So there's a bump here that's here. You have a dip, then a bump. And then, that's the dip. That's going about -10. The rest of it's kind of funky. That's a little bit of a dip at 3K, which I don't mind. And then, it fades off. So this is the correction afterwards. There's still the dip. I'm aware that it's there, but it's corrected a lot.
Wow.
So that's one thing that does, but that is on a speaker perspective. Here you can see where like there was, phase stuff. There's still, phase shifts, and that's happening. And part of the reason that there's that bump is, again, it's the room, and you're getting a cancellation. The green is the after, but it's pretty daggone flat.
Whew.
From where it really kind of matters. And then you just have to, check the low end in headphones. And that's the left, but you'll see there's different stuff that was on the right. The last bit, let me find where the graphs, there was the way that it measures also.
Brian, how much is the system? Or how much did you pay for it?
Yeah, so about $4,800 US. So this right here, this is how it measures.
So I said correct. It's over 3,000 euro the difference. So
yeah, totally. It's not something I would recommend for somebody that's starting out. SonarWorks will be fine. Just know that it inherently has some issues. But this is showing like the measurement of my speakers in detailed. Like you can see, okay, -30, +30. That makes my 60-degree angle. The setup is good. And as you get really in, what it was showing is that the actual distance from the right side and the left side was 0.2 meters difference. And also showing the degree difference and, the splay difference. So that is something that, I'll flip back around. Sorry, I nerded on this for a bit.
Yeah, that's huge.
That is
that's
something that, that is something that you can't get with the SonarWorks. And again, that's what's the power of the Trinoff, is it's not only adjusting the frequency, it's adjusting the phase, and it's adjusting for three-dimensional difference. To where, Rob, I think I told you this a couple months ago. The issue I had was on like the speaker stand. Like these are the anchors. I mean, they're heavy duty speaker stands. But the floor just kind of does this. And I was sitting there doing all this measurement. I've got my lasers and all this stuff. And then realizing that nothing that I could do except for having to sort of shim one side. Like you could run a laser line across the two drivers or in the tweeters. And you could just see that one was slightly different no matter what you were doing. And that's the thing that the Trinoff picked up. And Will and I both had the same sort of reaction, that it's not night and day, but it is dusk and dawn, to where like my center image just became so much more focused. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a thing. I mean, and then just filling in to the best that it can in the holes, but being able to take like that 15 dB dip around 90 is really what my room is, and making it so it's only -6. I can work with that. I borrowed a sub from a friend of mine trying to fill that in. It didn't fill it in. So it's just one of those where like nothing I can do about it in this space until I one day, can move out in the country and purpose build like
The studio as it should be.
a facility, floated floor, the right space, and so. But none of us can really do that. So yeah, it's not cheap, and it was an investment. And I would not suggest anybody spend that money unless you're working professionally, which
Did
I am. We
did
all
it?
are. But it's been since having it from the beginning of the year and doing other mixes. It's close to being paid for. And the time I've saved has been, invaluable. If I had to sit there and invoice for the time saved, I would already say that it's paid for itself.
No, that's great to hear.
Sorry,
Usually it's not the
I
case.
go hard. I don't try to go
Yeah.
hard.
Uh,
I'm
did it
soft.
ever
I'm a
happen?
teddy bear.
The SonarWorks, when you set up the SonarWorks and your speakers the first time, you need to go with the mic, and I
Yeah.
always use a stand so it's the same level, and trying my best anyway.
Don't they say not like they say don't use a stand though? That's
Yeah.
they say
I
to
try
hold
with the
it.
hand, but I feel like I'm shivering
Yeah,
each
totally.
time.
That's
And
the
it
thing that
bothers
goes
me.
a little bonkers.
But the problem is,
Uh,
it makes that noise, boop, 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 and it drives me crazy because it needs to be
yeah.
exactly like 32 times or something like that.
My
And
wife texted me when I was
What-
doing it. She's like,
exactly,
"What
that's the
you
problem. My
doing?"
wife says, it's coming to me, and, are you doing that stuff again? I cannot bear to hear it anymore. And
Yep.
why am I doing it every time? Is because like you're measuring, you're all set up, and then 2 days later or 2 months later, you're going with to clean your desk, and somehow you manage to move one of your speakers, like not
Yep.
much, but that
Yep.
much, and then you're like, shit. I don't know where it was. I need to do the calibration again. I hate that.
I'll
That's
show
why
you
I wanted to ask you, Brian, did it ever happen to you, like to set it all up, and then when you're cleaning, move a little bit the speaker, and it says,
Yeah.
okay, go
Yeah,
back.
totally. It's
Okay.
and I didn't find, and I did the same thing that Rob had. It was like I didn't like what it did the first time, and I've worked in places that have really well balanced systems, both near fields, mids, and fars, that it all sounds right.
Yeah.
I didn't, and then it was probably 2 or 3 times of what I assumed or felt like I'm not doing anything different, but the calculation kept changing, and then I liked the third one the best. This is the Trinoff mic. Let me carefully take this off. It's like some space age contraption. Space age. We're in the space age. This
Oh, wow.
is
It is.
so it actually has like 4 capsules,
Interesting. Yeah.
and there's a little dot. When you have it on, that it will evenly, like you can see like this front mic in the center. If you have those lined up, that should, and you put it essentially right where your head's gonna be, and it's about.
It looks like a spaceship.
It busts out one tone, and then from there, it does the math. And
Yeah.
when I was able to sit there and look at it and say, okay, well, of course there's something that's a little bit off, because you're going to have natural variances, even on you can sit there and measure, your speaker stands or monitor stands or whatever it is, and every now and then there's going to be slight variances. And if you're trying to get into the weeds and really have them accurate, then again, like the speaker stand itself is going to impact that, and you're trying to make a perfect 60-degree triangle and all this stuff. And I've got these things set now to where the mid and the high are on the inside and the low is to the outside. I tried it the other way. I've had them vertically, and this is the cleanest center, and it does have that 2-way and 3-way, but I found that I haven't used that. And your Focalis have that switch, right? Can you make them 2 ways, Christian?
Mine is just 2 ways. It's
Oh,
not,
okay. Sorry. Yeah. So this is a
yeah.
3-way that can be recalibrated to be a 2-way, which is why I don't have like a pair of mix cubes, because I can make it be that way. But what I found even here is that in my position, like I'm just missing the low end, but if I sit back a foot, I get all the low end that I need. So I'll sit close in, and it's like I'm mixing on the mix cubes, but with just
Yeah.
much greater detail. And then I'll grab like either I'll just listen and I'll just move my seat back a foot, and then I'm catching all the low end, and I'll check it there, and then I'll just sit there and move the fader, make an adjustment, or for Pro Tools I'll use that the Avid Control app, and I'll just sit back a couple feet, really in the true sweet spot, and do mixes off of the Control app. And it's just like, and that's the thing, like, people like move their head around like this all the time, trying to, hear the center. I don't have to do that anymore with the Trenov. But again, like anything else, and you're just dealing with, I can't change the room that I'm in. So,
Right.
but I can change where I sit. That's free,
You said something important, because this was the same thing that happened to me when I got it. I remember the first day I was like pretty impressed. I was like, oh, this is cool. It definitely made a change, right? And then I remember coming back, sitting down the next day, right off the bat, my ears told me something's off. And it's because I've come from rooms that, I don't know if they're perfectly tuned, whatever, however you want to put it, but they're accurate, Like I
Right.
get great mixes out of here. So my ears are adjusted to it. And it was like right off the bat, I was like, there's something weird about it. And even like, I got to one where I liked, just like you said, the third one. And my third one was like, I like that the best. And maybe my hand was more steady or something, right?
Yeah.
But I was still like, I don't know. I get more accurate mixes without it. And that was like the ultimate conclusion. It just, my ears told me something's off. It doesn't feel right. And then, the more and more I tested it, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. It's how we're holding it, because
Probably.
just slight adjustments off, it's just going to throw all the measurements off every time. And it just makes complete sense to me.
I think Christian, the way you're doing it, even if they say don't hold it, putting on a stand, probably with a shock mount, would be the best way.
That's my last resort, because.
But even when it's taking, when you move it to the whatever the circle is, and then it's taking multiple samples in that place. Even if you're like slightly moving it while it's taking those samples, each of those samples, like you're not getting even samples because
Nope.
There's
because he's not taking
slight
from the
variance.
same point, because you have a middle point and you have the first circle and then the third circle, and you always need to be somewhere in between, right? But you're not always at the same point. You're sometimes dead in the middle, sometimes you're on the second, sometimes you're between the second and the third. So
yeah, and it almost feels like like I don't get like mad about too much stuff, or I don't get my feelings hurt. But I kind of get my feelings hurt when I was doing it. It's like move the mic. It's like, why aren't you moving the mic in the right place? What's wrong with you? And you're sitting there doing it, and you're like, why are you judging me, Sonar Works? It's like,
I think all of us go through that with that thing. It ticked me off.
Maybe your mix would be better if you learn how to hold a mic, dummy. And you're like, I'm just trying to hold the mic right.
Hold it to the speaker. I am.
I know, right? You're just like, tell me to hold the mic wrong again. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
I dare you. Tell me one more time.
I'm gonna smack you in the chops.
Each time, same story.
Gentlemen, I think we should probably call it here. We've been going for a little over 3 hours. So
it's a long one.
We put in some work today, but I mean, I can't thank y'all enough, and everyone in the chat too. I mean, this is it's great stuff that we get to unpack these things and have these type of discussions. Because I mean, let's face it, Brian is a plethora of knowledge, and you obviously have tons and tons of experience. And especially in the chat, most of us are wanting to get in your chair. So it's amazing that you could come on here and give your guidance and suggestions, Christian as well. So,
we're not even close to Brian, but
come on.
There's always place for.
No, go on. No, stop.
I think Rob, you have a lot of insights that I haven't think about it. I think like you said, Brian is a book of knowledge as well. So, and I think this is a benefit for everybody also joining the chat, because I wish I had something like this when I started, just to get the some sort of information, because on YouTube you can find it on YouTube, but it's not, put in a certain logical order. So you need to know for a fact what you're looking for. And totally appreciate also this podcast and inviting me here.
Definitely.
I almost forgot today, so I joined a little bit late. I apologize for that. And Brian, one more thing. You said
Yes,
you
sir.
have some new live, not new live.
Yeah, so
live.
I was gonna actually ask Rob, like, are you going live today for a live mix thing?
I'm not. No.
Okay, yeah, I'll do it probably in an hour, maybe two. I gotta take a bio break and eat some food, so like maybe like 2:15 U.S. Eastern time, GMT -5 for the international folks. Yeah, I'll go live, and it's a fresh mix from scratch, and we'll just chat through and make it work. I actually finally got
that
like
means 1
some
hour?
decent. Yeah, I finally got TT cables to RCA to go into the iRig, so I can just come right out of my patch bay, which is rather than having to sit there and find kooky ways of getting signal into the iRig, and I'll throw up a mic and try to make a mix and ask questions and so
So
go ahead and follow, not to put a shameless plug, but so you'll get a notification when the live comes out.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone in the chat, please go follow Reference Mix Brian here. You get to see him in action, so that's another beautiful thing about
you'll see me there going like, oh shit.
Are you doing the same way as Rob does with the phone?
Yeah, I'll do the phone.
Do you have the Osmo? Because now I got it as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to find the right position to make it work. Yeah. You can live with dual camera now, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'll put that up, and then there's always like trying to find the space on this thing to get the screen, to get the face. I mean, I can also do it without the face, if you want to see my ugly mug. But it's always like, then it would be like one of the feet of the Osmo is like trying to get right between two faders, then like you're flipping a layer, and then all of a sudden like the fader starts clacking into the foot, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to break something, So
Rob, you should get some, something from DJI, because everybody got the DJI Osmo from you, or at least I myself, I did it.
I got this one for Christmas.
Yeah,
I saw it.
Version.
I saw it. I saw it on Rob's live. He recommended it, so I bought it. So.
Super cool.
You'll have to, give me a.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to. Can you set it through TikTok to like you tap on the screen in like the DJI? So we're totally not talking about audio, but can you tap the screen and have it like follow?
I don't think so, because you got to be in the app for it.
Yeah,
you need the app. You need their own app.
But I mean, it's stable. That's for sure. I mean, right now I've got an old mic stand with a phone holder attached to it. Because I did one thing when you remove the phone from the DJI, like I was on the live and I was trying to show the screen, then I put it back on, and then like it just starts over. You have to go back into the app and like recalibrate it. It seems like it doesn't want to play nicely, so I'm going analog stand. Old school. So.
But all right, everyone. I hope everyone gives Brian here, Reference, a follow, and then my guy Kristen a follow. We're gonna be doing this every Tuesday, so please hit your notifications. Also hit your notifications for them, because they go live, they showcase their mixing, they do their own thing as well. So this continues not just with me, but again, everyone, Brian, Kristen, thank you for joining. Chat. Till next time.
Thank you.
Y'all have a blessed day, everyone.